Noche del 12 de febrero, fiesta de la Candelaria, una ventana, un lucero y un ritmo mestizo y paria. Noche del 12 de febrero, fiesta de la Candelaria, una ventana, un lucero y un ritmo mestizo y paria. Mira que el niño no acabe, sal muchacha que no calle, que todo el pueblo ya sabe que te está creciendo el talle y los senos no te caben en tu vestido de calle. Y los senos no te caben en tu vestido de calle. En la Candelaria cuando llegará.
So, all right, my name's John Bush. I hail from Texas. Yeehaw. And today I want to talk about my journey from politics and protesting and a reactionary paradigm to exit and build strategy, overcoming limiting beliefs, aligning with my divine purpose, and I want to share my vision for the Confederation of Freedom Communities, which is how I think we can get from here, statism, technocracy, tyranny, to there, a genuinely free society where we can spend our time philosophizing by the river and not debating how we're going to dismantle the corrupt state apparatus. And I do want to spend some time too, I think what I have to offer this community, both folks still trying to find their footing, find their place, and leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, is helping us to really identify our limiting beliefs and those thoughts that are holding us back from taking our activism, our work, our lives to the next level. So I'm going to be mixing in some of the work of Napoleon Hill as I share my talk, and so yeah, let's roll. So I've been doing this freedom thing for 22 years now, so that's more than half of my adult life. I've been concerned with how do we upset this nightmare tyranny. Some would call it the New World Order, others call it the predator class. But when I woke up in 2002 after catching a documentary by old Alex Jones, are you guys watching all the drama with them trying to take away his program? And they did like $1 billion judgment, and then they had trustees, and they were about to sell it to The Onion, which is really dastardly, right? The Onion apparently bought the InfoWars, and the reason why I think they did is so fast forward 10 or 20 years, everyone will think the InfoWars content was satire, right? Some of it does seem like satire, but so woke up from that documentary and just really was kind of alarmed at what was going on with problem, reaction, solution, false flag terrorism. Started trying to wake people up, red pilling people as they call it, and found that a lot of people didn't really care, and learned about Ron Paul and libertarianism, got involved in the 2008 presidential campaign, and that really was like, oh, there's a political home for me, right? You guys Ron Paul folks, I'm sure. The cool thing is because Ron Paul was like ideologically pure in the message he put out, he created this massive movement. And while he didn't do well politically, he spurred a lot of people and created a whole lot of seeds and planted a whole lot of seeds and got a lot of people active and involved still to this day. And of course, those folks evolved in large part towards voluntarism and agorism. You contrast that with some of the politicos that win, and really all they do is just take the seat of power and ultimately get corrupted themselves. So I found out along the way that politics is not the answer. Started a political action committee in 2010 with a handful of folks, and this really was a big eye-opener for me that alternative institutions, building the parallel economy, what we now call exit and build strategy is the way. We were actually pretty good at politics. We managed to stop police officers from being trained to do blood withdrawals in the city of Austin. So they were going to train the cops to pull people over and do blood withdrawals and you know, do like they were going to be phlebotomists on the side of the road if they suspected you of a DWI. So we dressed up like vampire cops and paraded around downtown and handed all these flyers out. We ended up getting an ordinance passed that stopped the police officers from being trained to do blood withdrawals. So it was like, yeah, big victory. Spent all this time, all this energy. It was kind of fun, actually. But turns out they just did the blood withdrawals with a nurse at the jail, right? and they would get a court order, like an overnight faxed court order. So it seemed like a victory, when in all reality, we were just making government slightly a little more tolerable. Another effort was with these fusion centers, where they collect information, they share intelligence amongst local, state, and federal law enforcement. It's been kind of a mind trip to see how far advanced the surveillance state has come from the early days when the Department of Homeland Security came out after all the 9/11 treachery. But these fusion centers would collect information, and it turns out they were collecting information on activists and Ron Paul people. We learned about the Missouri Information Analysis Center. They had a report called the Modern Militia Movement, and it was like, you might be dealing with a militia member, which would be a threat, right, to law enforcement, if they have Ron Paul bumper stickers, or end the Fed, or abolish the IRS. And so imagine, a cop pulls someone over and they think they're dealing with somebody that's about to bust out a AR-15 or something. Anyway, that was a big eye-opener. These fusion centers, they're all around the country. And so they started to pop one up in Austin, the Austin Regional Intelligence Center. And I remember the first time I heard about it, the chief at the time, Art Acevedo, he was doing a press conference, and he's like, yeah, we'll have the technology to have cameras that can analyze in real time if people are gathering together in a large group about to do something. Oh, man, it's just wild how that technology is now completely advanced, and it's all in our pocket and analyzing all the algorithms and everything we say. But long story short, we pushed back on this fusion center, and through the city of Austin, we insisted that they have a privacy policy that says you can't collect information of a political, religious, or social view. It has to be a suspicion of a crime. So we're like, yeah, another victory. And then later, the Texas Motorcycle Rights Association contacted us. They're like bikers, and they represent biker clubs, because the Department of Public Safety was pulling them over and taking pictures of their insignia and their tattoos and putting it in a state fusion center database. So they had mass influence at the state level, and we ended up pushing through a bill that had those same privacy policy provisions for all the fusion centers in Texas. You can't collect information of a political, religious, or social view. Victory, yeah, we did it. Well, fast forward several years, and there was a leak from an anonymous hacker group, and it turns out that my name and Derek's name were in this Fusion Center database for hosting a Freedom Cell meetup. So the point that I want to make is, first of all, federal politics, national politics is completely corrupt. The system is operating exactly as it was intended to operate, and for us to think that we can change that, I believe, is a bit naive. Even though people say that means that you're black-pilled, that just simply fails to recognize that there's other methods for pursuing freedom besides just politics. State and local activism, some people say, hey, let's give that a try. But what I came to realize was that instead of creating more freedom for ourselves, we were merely slowing the growth of tyranny. And that was unsatisfactory, because we're all trying to create a world where we can live our lives according to our own ends, right? And so that's where this whole idea of taking responsibility for creating freedom into our own hands came about. And that's the genesis of this exit and build concept, right? Derek Broze put it out in his book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, Exit and Build. Exit that which you disbelieve in and build new systems, right? And so a huge piece of that is alternative currencies. Of course, that's what we're talking about here at MoneroTopia. So early on, before I learned about Bitcoin, we were going to farmers markets and encouraging people to use silver dimes, using alternative currencies, barter. You know, silver dimes in the States were 90% silver, 1964 and earlier. 1964 and earlier, dimes, half dollars, back when there was still a semblance of sound money. And so it was like, well, if we want to end the Fed, we can't pass a resolution or audit the Fed. We should limit our use of Federal Reserve notes, right? Yeah, and ultimately, I don't know that that's necessarily going to end the Fed, but at least if we can carve out our own pocket, our own counter economies, then we can at least not contribute to that, which is great. So that was before I learned about Bitcoin. Learned about Bitcoin in 2011, and there was a guy that was like, hey, you should mine Bitcoin. You could do it on your laptop. You get 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes or so if you solve a block. And here's a big lesson. I remember telling him distinctly, like, yeah, I just don't. I'm not interested in that, but I don't have time to really figure it out. Let me do some research first. So that was a lesson for me that I take still to this day, that we should always try to have the mental capacity or the CPU available to take advantage of an opportunity when it presents itself. But oftentimes, and this is medicine for myself too, we're so overwhelmed. We got so much going on. We're not able to see the forest for the trees always. So missed that opportunity. And then I remember it must have been 2012 or maybe 2012 or so. It's like Bitcoin went from $20 or $30 to $80. I was like, I'm going to wait to get in until it comes back down to 20 or 30, which is funny because people still say that, oh, it's up to 60,000, but it just was 25. I got to wait. That's why dollar cost average isn't important. But the funny thing is that early on in the Bitcoin movement, MoneroTopia was saying this last night. Were you all here for his talk? That was incredible. What a revolutionary. I tweeted, MoneroTopia makes us all look like Michael Saylor. He's so radical. So the thing about Bitcoin is early on, we're like, it's going to end the Fed. Bitcoin, we see the hope, we see the potential, we see the technology. It's uncontrollable, uncensorable. It's anonymous. That's what we used to think back in the day. Of course, the Silk Road case really opened our eyes to that. It's going to end the Fed. Well, I think we very much underestimated our enemy, because fast forward to the present day, and the Federal Reserve Bank they have plans to issue their own central bank digital currency. Not only that, but if you're familiar with Roger Ver's work with hijacking Bitcoin, they've in large part co-opted the essence, the radical roots of the Bitcoin project, right? It used to be about peer-to-peer electronic cash, upsetting the system, and now it's about storing value, building wealth, and there's all sorts of chicanery going on with all that. But let me get into this exit and build strategy thing and how I believe we can go from here to there. And I want to encourage people to think big, and instead of thinking in terms of the next election or the next altcoin season or the next bull market, we need to be thinking generationally. We need to be asking ourselves, how do our actions in the present moment affect the future generations that are yet to come? And we need to have a bigger picture thing, right? So I largely see our enemies that we're dealing with as this predator class, the shadow government, the Bilderbergs, the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the big banks. And they have long-term, big-picture plans to roll out this tyranny and this technocracy. One of the biggest concerns that they're rolling out is what's called technocracy. You guys are familiar with this. I'm really excited to see this term so prevalent here at this conference. But there's 4 key pieces of technology that I'm concerned with when it comes to technocracy. And I'll share how exit and build strategy can help to upset that and overcome that. The first piece is digital ID. And the digital ID is rolling out rapidly. And I doubt there's a whole lot of Trump folks in this audience, but maybe for folks that are watching from home or the recording, the way that this predator class works is they use problem reaction solution in order to get people to do things that they wouldn't have normally supported. For example, with all this border crisis going on, Donald Trump in his first administration was actually pushing for surveillance with an entry-exit system with digital ID and biometric surveillance. So if you fly out of the States and most other countries, I actually saw it here in Mexico for the first time flying in, there's like this turnstile that you go through, and there's these pictures that you're asked to take. Now, thankfully, you can still opt out. I hope you guys are opting out. I don't know, when I came into the airport in Mexico City, there's a huge line, totally inconvenient. And then there's these really efficient, and there's no line at all going through those little cattle pens. So I hope you guys didn't take the convenient route and go through and scan your picture. Although if you have a passport, you already have a biometric picture that you've given up to the man. But I guess it's the principle of the matter. I chose to stand in the long-ass line with all the other foreigners. Anyway, that in the U.S. was put forward by Donald Trump. There's also now like all sorts of facial recognition at the border. So there's these false heroes that are still part of this problem reaction solution paradigm. So digital ID is a big piece of it. It's already well advanced. There's the ID.me. Last time I was going to go mess with my taxes in 1040, I wanted to go check in on the past 1040s and stuff, and it's like the only way to log into that service is the ID.me. So I never did log in. And I never did call to figure that stuff out. I hate dealing with the IRS. It's the worst. But maybe Trump will abolish the IRS and end the Fed, even though he leveraged the Fed to inflate the currency by 40% and massively rack up the debt. So digital ID is a piece of it. Of course, central bank digital currencies are a big piece of it, and a huge deception that's currently taking place, and what we need to watch out for and be aware of and talk to people about is how Trump, another misdirection. We're going to ban CBDCs. We're going to put forward a bill to ban CBDCs. But really what's going to happen, if you guys are familiar with the work of Whitney Webb, it's solid research. She really uncovers a lot, even though her essays are like entire books in themselves. But there's a lot of good work there. But ultimately what's taking place is this shadow government, Bilderberg, Peter Thiel, big finance, big tech. It's like an alternative deep state. They are pushing forward the same agenda for transparent, censorable, centralized, programmable money, right? Those are key elements of a CBDC, as we heard from Aaron Day's talk. They're pushing that forward, but really through dollar-backed stablecoins, like Tether, for example. So again, not everything is always as it seems. CBDC is a big piece of it. The other piece is the vaccine passport. And really, the vaccine passport is a technology that's all about controlling people's freedom of movement. Vaccines were merely the first application. What I believe this technology is likely going to be used for is it's going to be tied with a personal carbon allowance, a PCA. That's what the World Economic Forum's putting forward. They even have a program called MyPass. It's like a little vaccine passport software. That'll integrate with the carbon output that you're allowed to have. And of course, if you check out Whitney's work as well, it's all about this carbon credit, carbon finance, tokenizing and securitizing all the resources in the world. I think that's a huge piece of it, and that's something that we really need to be aware of. And then again, with Trump, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it's on a lot of people's minds. A lot of the Republicans and a lot of the people backing him, especially Larry Fink of BlackRock, they're all pushing to tokenize and do all this weird carbon credit environmental finance nonsense. So just really to underscore the politics isn't the solution. We shouldn't rest on our laurels. We shouldn't become complacent. So the fourth piece is social credit score, of course, tying everything in with the algorithms, all the big tech phones, all the software, all of the social media posts. And hopefully it doesn't get as bad as China and jaywalking and all that nonsense. But these are the four horsemen of the technocratic apocalypse, as I like to call them. So what do we do to push back? Well, pushing back on full frontal pushback through the government is obviously not the way. So what we can hope to do is identify areas in our lives where we're vulnerable to their control. I call this the exit and build self-assessment. And with Live Free Academy, it's a company I started in 2021. We help people to create greater freedom. We help people to leverage exit and build strategy to live a life of their dreams, really, to become more free, more prosperous, more in alignment with their divine purpose. And so we teach people to go through and ask yourself, like, is all of my income coming from Social Security? Is all of my income coming from a 401k or an IRA? Do I have a side hustle? Do I have alternative investments that are unconfiscatable outside of the system? How many people do I know in my local area that can get my back and support me? Am I growing my own food? What percentage of my food comes from a centralized source that is vulnerable to supply chain collapse? Right? These are all the questions we ask ourselves. And then what I encourage people to do is identify those areas which you're most vulnerable. So for example, if somebody's retired and all their income is coming from Social Security, they could find themselves in a difficult situation if that Social Security gets converted over to CBDCs, and now all of a sudden, in order to use the CBDC system, you have to be up to date on your inoculations, or perhaps you have to not exceed a certain carbon output for your household. It's kind of ridiculous even talking through this stuff, but this is the world that we're going towards. This is the world that many people are going towards. We're not going that way. We're going to show another path forward. And so identify that area and then lean into that area. And then we have an accelerator membership with our company, Live Free Academy, and we help people to create goals and create what we call an activation plan so they can actually step through decoupling oneself from the beast system. And when it comes to exit and build strategy, I like to think of in terms of a household path. So we're exiting and building in our own lives. We're exiting and building in our own household. We're identifying ways that we can build wealth outside the system. We're identifying ways to decouple from the technocracy, big tech, using encrypted communication, whatever it may be. And that's one piece of it. And that's fundamental, and that's the most important. We need to, like we're on an airplane, of course, the oxygen masks come down. You're instructed to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So let us try to do everything we can to become as independent as possible in our own lives. But let's not stop there. And this is the great thing about this conference. There's this activist heart here that isn't really present in other cryptocurrency conferences. It kind of got dwindled away, unfortunately. The energy here at this conference is very much like the original energy in the Bitcoin community, where people were anti-state, anti-authoritarian, and trying to do what we could to leverage this technology to create a better world. It's since gone all number go up, but there's exit and build household strategy, and then there's this broader strategy, which I like to call exit and build meta strategy. So the first step is to identify where we're susceptible to the state's control, to the technocracy's control, and try to work our way out of that. The next piece is to gather with other freedom lovers, to work together through communities like the Freedom Cell Network, and ultimately the vision that I have for how we get from here to there, which ultimately could take generations, is to create what I like to call the Confederation of Freedom Communities. So the idea is, as we're exiting and building in our own lives and our own households, we're connecting with other people that are doing the same, and we're beginning to form our own counter economy. You guys familiar with the work of Samuel Edward Konkin III? He wrote this great book called The New Libertarian Manifesto, and he lays out it's more of a strategy. It's a philosophy and a strategy of agorism. Agora is the Greek word for open air market. And the epitome of an open air market is taking place right outside. How cool is that? I hope you guys are spending your Monero out there with those folks. That's the good stuff. So many great wares, too. And the Mexicanos are like great salespeople. So you go to a farmer's market in the States or in Austin, and people are just twiddling their thumbs on their phone and you just walk past. But they're like, you want to try? You want to try? And then you're like, no. They're like, no, really, you should try. You know, I love that. Anyway, agorism is open air market, and it's this idea that if we want to create the free society, we need to do our absolute best to live in alignment with the philosophy of liberty, which it's not always easy to live free in an unfree world, but we should take proactive steps where we can. And he lays out this idea of a counter economy, counter economics. And that's trading outside the system, under the table, in black and gray markets. Black markets being those activities which are expressly prohibited by the state, gray markets being those activities which require consent or agreement by the state. And so try to work outside, under the table. Another broader definition of counter economic activity is anything that evades or defies the state. That's counter economic. So connect with your neighbors, trade with one another, use alternative currencies like Monero. But let's not stop with Monero, because I teach a lot of people how to use cryptocurrency and onboard a lot of folks, especially older folks that aren't really comfortable with technology. And the objection that often comes up is, what happens if the internet goes down? Here's a quick bit on limiting beliefs, because I want to make sure to work that stuff in. Oftentimes when I hear people, when we're like, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was this alternative cryptocurrency that would allow us to trade together outside of the system, and there's nothing the government could do to stop that? Isn't that something you'd be interested in, right? You're like, well, we have that. It's called Monero. It's called Bitcoin, right? Except for the transparency piece. And a lot of people, their first instinct is, oh, well, that could never work. Or, oh, well, what if they shut the internet down? Or it could get hacked. Ultimately, what I think that is, on the surface level, is this excuse, but deeper rooted, and let us try to identify this within ourselves whenever we bring up limiting beliefs and objections. I think it's a deeper limiting belief that a lot of people aren't comfortable with technology, or perhaps they feel intimidated by learning some big, new, complex thing that's pretty challenging to wrap your head around. So rather than sit with that, oh, I've struggled with technology in the past. This young man is encouraging me to learn this new technology, and I feel uncomfortable with that. In fact, I feel a little bit of anxiety because I lost a password when I did this or that. Let us identify those limiting beliefs and work through them, because ultimately it's these limiting beliefs that are holding us all back from greatness. None of us are living up to our full potential. None of us are taking actions in alignment with the divine creativity that lies within each and every one of us. And the biggest thing that's holding us back isn't the New World Order. It's not Donald Trump. It's not Michael Saylor. It's that little voice inside our head that casts doubt. But we can flip the script on that voice and leverage it to be our biggest cheerleader instead of our biggest critic, which oftentimes that voice tends to be. Yeah, so thank you. Use that round of applause to take a quick sip of coffee. All right, so teaching people about crypto, teaching people about Bitcoin, and the first thing that people say is, well, what if the internet goes down? And I would encourage people, too, to step into a place of empowerment. For people that have that as the number one reason why they're not leveraging this empowering technology that is decentralized cryptocurrency, for folks that are genuinely concerned that the beast system is so powerful that it could shut down the internet to prevent us from trading amongst ourselves, wouldn't the natural next step be to work on decentralized internet communication platforms, right? Like if you genuinely think they're going to shut the internet down, why not? You don't stop at that excuse. You say, well, what can I do to help do that? But a lot of people are disempowered. A lot of people are stuck in a reactionary paradigm. A lot of people are afraid to get their feet wet and go build something or support people that are building something. So I really want to encourage people to do just that. And when we're doing activism to help onboard people, let's try to identify, and again, let's identify this within ourselves first and foremost, but let's try to identify like what's really holding this person back and how can we help bring those limiting beliefs out of them, right? All right, so the counter economy is a big piece of the Confederation of Freedom Communities. Identifying like-minded people, working with one another, hiring one another, trading amongst ourselves. You know, we recently bought a butchered cow. We bought a whole cow's worth of beef with Bitcoin, which was pretty cool. Although the transaction fee was really high. And the guy that we bought it from is a Bitcoin maximalist, so I don't even broach the topic of Monero, but I will next time we make that purchase. But still, it was pretty cool. We're decentralizing the food, we're decentralizing the money. And that's another thing that comes up. Well, if we use only cryptocurrency, what about the grocery stores? I'm sure you guys have heard this one time and time again. Well, that's why we need to have resilient food networks. That's a piece of this confederation of freedom communities. Working with one another, hiring one another. My company, Live Free Academy, we have like 18 or 20 full-time or part-time staff people, and every single one of them but two I met through the freedom community and through the Freedom Cell network, right? And so they don't have to worry about needing to take a shot or some BS mandate. We do require drug tests, though, when they get hired. And if they pass the drug test, they can't work with us, because that means they're a square. Joking, not joking. No drug test. So that's a huge piece of it, the counter-economics. But here's where we take things further. It's not just the counter-economics, which obviously this conference is very concerned with, but it's also the other piece is land and community, like actual intentional community. So what we encourage people to do is to exit the cities, to buy land and build community in the country. We do a conference called the Exit and Build Land Summit, and we're about to have our 5th one. It's actually going to be at Joel Salatin's Polyface Farms, which has been a challenge, too, because we railed so hard on Trump, and we did this campaign that was like, vote for nobody. And I even put out, like, political attack ads against Trump, trying to help people recognize, like, it's Operation Warp Speed. Give me a break here. And now you're supporting this guy like he's God's gift to the freedom movement. But it was kind of – now I'm having to answer like, well, Joel Salatin's going to be appointed some advisor to the USDA. Don't you think you should have voted? Joel Salatin, too, isn't a politics guy. It's about taking responsibility. It's about leaving a legacy of liberty through the land, through the community that you build, through the impact that you leave on future generations. Anyway, land and community, if we really want to create freedom in the moment now, I highly, highly, highly recommend people considering getting out to the country. It's a totally different ball game living in a big city like Austin, for example, which is where I was born and raised, and living in a much smaller rural community like Bastrop, which is where we call home now. We have a 10-acre homestead, and we have a little mini intentional community. So there's 11 humans on the property. We got a good 8 ducks, maybe 15 or 18 chickens, and some gardens. We just dug out a giant pond that we're going to build, and there's a food forest that's in production, and it's not in production. We're building it, and the food forest is going to drain down into the pond. We got bees, all sorts of stuff. And so when I think about that, you know, if shit hits the fan, it's not going to be easy, obviously. But we got a freezer full of beef still. It's like all the crappy cuts. They're at the bottom of the freezer. So when shit hits the fan, we'll be doing a lot of roasts and tenderized beef cutlets, which is like mystery beef meat. Either way, it'll be great. We'll be eating like kings when the world's going to hell all around us. But I feel more comfortable because we have space, because we're not in the middle of all of the chaos when shit goes down. And it's not only just us on this homestead. In fact, one of the families that live there, they just birthed their third child, and she did a free birth in our guest house. No midwife, nothing whatsoever, which is pretty cool. So now we have an amenity for folks that live on the property. We have a birthing center on the property, which is pretty cool. But she had a nice pool and everything, or the little tub that she used. But the idea is to get together in community. And for those of you that are like, I love the city, like I do stuff with Tom Woods, who's a total badass. But he's like, John, I'm not moving out to the country. I love the city. I don't know if you guys follow him. He's always eating at a nice steakhouse. He's always going to the New York show with his family. He's got a good life, that guy. He's like, I'm not going out to the country, man. I love the city life. But I do want to encourage folks. And I was going to say, if you have the means. If you don't have the means, get the means. That's another limiting belief. How could I possibly afford land? I can barely pay rent, right? Well, Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So we just need to really believe in our ability to craft a life of our dreams. But if you're going to stay in the city, I would highly advise at least get, 2 acres outside of the city. And here's how community comes into play and strength in numbers. You can go in with a few people. Everybody throws in $10K, $15K, and then you put the down payment. Or maybe if you got somebody that you can borrow the money from, or you could do DeFi against all your crypto gains. I've been doing decentralized finance for a while now using Compound, a DeFi app. Used it to paint the house, for a down payment on our car, down payment on our solar system, to expand our office. And essentially you could take the gains that you've made with crypto, and when you borrow against your cryptocurrency, it's not a taxable event, which is pretty cool. But long story short, have a spot out in the country. And even if you don't live there full time, you can go on the weekends. It can be a little retreat. You could take the family down. You could go hunting or just go hang out around a fire and, drink a 6-pack with a friend. But you post an RV there. You post a nice shed that's well sealed up, and you start stacking food supply and food storage there. I highly recommend it, because when we identify areas that are going to be most impacted by this technocratic agenda, it's most definitely going to be these smart cities. Major cities are already so advanced when it comes to the surveillance, and then you got 5G interconnecting everything. It's called the Internet of Things, the Internet of Bodies. This also goes back to all this carbon finance, tokenization. They're really trying to securitize everything on the planet. Bill Gates' Microsoft even has a planetary supercomputer, which the goal is to identify, catalog, and analyze every single bit of biodiversity on the planet, including human beings. So get out to the country, escape the technocracy. There's a lot more freedom. There's people hunkering down. And if you don't necessarily do an intentional community, you can still connect with your neighbors in the area or connect with other freedom people. So this is, to take it a step further, the Confederation of Freedom Communities will have these nodes, and the nodes will be like-minded freedom communities, not just an actual intentional community where people live on the land cooperatively. And it doesn't mean like a commune, by the way. You can still have private ownership and private agreements. We connect all these communities. We connect the folks that are living in the house or the apartment, but they're getting together regularly at the meetup. They're trading. They're hosting their own farmers markets and agoras. We have a big agora that's going to take place in Central Texas here pretty soon. And the woman that's doing it, she's going to start doing it every single month at different areas in Central Texas. So we connect this confederation. It's much like a network state. I love the parallel society thing, because we always talk about parallel economy. What about an entire parallel society? So we connect these communities, we trade amongst ourselves, we create our own alternative guidelines and rule systems. We go to one another in times of need. Ultimately, we defend one another from criminals, public and private alike. And that's the vision that I have for this Confederation of Freedom Communities. It's going to take time piecemeal, but as on the individual level, we're decoupling ourselves through exit and build household strategy. So too, on a community level, are we decoupling ourselves from the beast system. Now, there's another piece of it that I want to share before I wrap up. And this is something that I was very skeptical of for my entire activist career ever since I heard about it. And that's this concept of sovereignty through law. That's what I define it. There's a lot of quackery in this space. But then, come to find out, when it comes to law, when it comes to the commercial code, when it comes to the private realm versus the public realm, there's actually a whole lot of ground to be gained. Are you guys familiar with this concept of the private realm? So you have the public realm, which is law, ordinances. Actually, I'm sorry, it's not law. It's the legal world. Law is an entirely different thing. It's the legal world, it's the ordinances, it's the edicts, it's man-made law. And then you have the private realm, which is free people getting together, working together, trading amongst themselves. So every time you do a transaction with these vendors, they're not reporting it over to the capital, right? That's the cool thing about Mexico, the underground economy, the counter economy. It's not even a thing that they philosophize about. It's like, that's how we grew up. We're going to report this? Give me a break. And then they all look out for each other too. So when you make a transaction, like I bought a mead, it said 12% alcohol by volume, but a little bit more. I had 2 of them. Definitely more than 24%. Anyway, I had one of those, and I was listening to Amir's talk, and it was like I was feeling emotional just because he's such a revolutionary, and the message was so potent, and you could tell how passionate he was about it. And it also felt good for me because he shouted out freedom cells as this agorist thing, and I was like, wow, the work that we're doing is like people that really matter to me that are doing really cool shit. He recognizes how important this work is. Anyway, great mead. I highly recommend the guy there. Pay with Monero. The transaction that you make when you're just paying someone privately, that's in the private realm. 2 consenting adults doing business with one another outside the scope of the system. So this private realm and sovereignty through law world, I believe, can act as a really powerful bridge between the statist economy, the public realm, and an agorist society, a free society outside the system. And so we recently linked up with this guy. His name's Bradley Logan, and we put on a free webinar. You can still sign up, livefree.academy/Trinity, livefree.academy/Trinity. And he posits that there's these 3 organizations. Instinctively, we would call them entities, but they're not legal entities at all. There's these 3 organizations that we can leverage in order to pursue our work, in order to further God's gifts that we've been given, in order to align with our divine purpose. And those 3 organizations are a non-statutory trust. So if you're familiar with the trust, you have trustees and a benefactor, but most of them are statutory. You file it, you go send it off to the state, Secretary of State, and then you go open a bank account, right? This is completely private, and it's not some weird, sketchy thing. It's actually has a whole lot of history in British common law. So a non-statutory trust, and the purpose of the non-statutory trust is to steward resources, like land, right? So we're actually leveraging this right now in order to shift our existing homestead and little intentional community and then acquire a larger piece of land so we can build a larger, bigger scale community, an eco community with dozens of families living on the property. So you have a non-statutory trust that stewards resources. Maybe it's cryptocurrency, maybe it's a car, maybe it's a tractor, or it's a piece of land. Then you have a private membership association. You guys heard about a private membership association? So instead of having an LLC where you got to go get permission from the man and you got to fill out a franchise tax report every damn year, which is a total pain in the ass, you have a private membership association where the people that you're working with, they're not your customers or your clients, they're members. And this too is enshrined in jurisprudence and court backing. It's as old as time, people getting together privately in fraternal organizations. The NAACP, for example, was a private membership association. So this is how the people interact with one another. This is how there's common guidelines and a system of governance and organization. And in the example of a community, the community members would all be members of the private membership association. Then to tie it all together, you start a church or a 508c1a. So in the tax code, if you're a church, actually, there's a mandatory exception from the income tax. So what we came to realize was that a lot of the work that we're already doing is spiritual in nature. Whether you're Christian or Buddhist or whatever, or if you're completely atheist, I just hope that we don't lose sight of the fact that the folks that are in control of the government and the mega corporations, many of them are satanic, predatory, psychopathic pedophiles. And they do all sorts of weird shit in the woods, and they worship big Moloch owl statues, and there's like pentagrams in the Washington, D.C. outline of the city. And it's like some hardcore evil shit. There's evil stuff going on, and there's an energy with that evil. And so what we're doing, it may seem like practical, or we're trying to decentralize and all this stuff, but I see it as us doing God's work, as us aligning with our true divine purpose, that which lights us up inside, that which just magnifies our creative capacity as free, powerful, and beautiful human beings. And unfortunately, we've lost sight of that. So we started a church. It's called Freedom Family Fellowship. We get together regularly. We talk about Christ's teachings. We talk about the Buddha. We talk about aligning with our true purpose, overcoming limiting beliefs, mindset. And then we get together and work in the garden. And our creed is harmony with self, identifying our purpose and pursuing it with passion, overcoming our internal struggles that have held us back in the past, doing shadow work, recognizing that we're all hurt individuals, and the more hurt we are, the more we hurt other people. So that's the harmony with self. Then there's harmony with the land, permaculture, regenerative agriculture, going on walks, going on hikes, getting our hands dirty. And then there's harmony with each other, building communities, relating to one another, nonviolent communication, right? And it's our belief when we have harmony in these three areas, then we're closer to God. So that's the church that we're putting forward. So we're going to be pushing forward our activism and our work through this Trinity model. And it's a bridge because when we're doing agorist stuff, under the table kind of deal, it's really hard to scale that because it's a challenge to steward resources. But if you have a non-statutory trust, we went into the bank account and set up a bank account without having anything filed. And they're like, well, we're going to need to see the certificate of formation. That's if you do an LLC, a little certificate of formation with the state of Texas stamped on it. I'm like, there is no certificate of formation. It's an unincorporated church. And the local bank was totally cool with it. So we now have that. And it's really exciting, too, because it's not like, oh, this transaction or selling this Bitcoin or whatever. It's an exception from the IRS code. And I think that's really special. So a key piece of this Confederation of Freedom Communities will be helping to onboard people into the private realm. There's already many communities that are doing this. Our friends in Tennessee at Haven Earth, our good buddy Jonathan England down in Costa Rica. And it's my hope that by exiting and building, letting go of the politics, abandoning the reactionary paradigm that consumes us and puts us in a space where we're manifesting that which we oppose, the more that you focus on the New World Order, the more you'll see it in your lives, the more overwhelmed and anxious you'll be. The more you connect with other freedom lovers, the more that you get out from behind the computer and get your hands dirty in the garden, the more you'll see how truly free we are now in the present moment. So we exit and build. We recognize those internal limiting beliefs that are holding us back from taking our work to the next level. Or if you're somebody that's still trying to find your place in this movement, you recognize maybe I don't need to be so shy. Maybe I don't have to feel uncomfortable and insecure when striking up conversations with people. Maybe I'll go out on a limb and ask my Uber driver if they want to set up a cake wallet and accept a Monero tip, even though, I don't know, I might be a little uncomfortable or stumble over my words. We push through those limiting beliefs. We connect with one another on a deeper level. We trade with one another. We hire one another. We participate and grow the counter economy. Ultimately, we get the hell out of the city, even if you do the middle path. Eventually, I have a feeling you're going to want to escape to your little oasis that you got there on the outside of town. And we confederate, we collaborate, we connect with one another. And ultimately, we all recognize that there's a light within us that in many instances has been dimmed. And if we can reorient ourselves to the divinity, we're all God's children, there's something really special about that. If we can recognize that divine light and that creative capacity, I really believe that the future is bright. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here at this conference and being part of this incredible movement that we all belong to. Thank you so much.
Okay, good morning. I guess the presentation by John was so good that there are no questions for him. Or maybe you can ask them in private. I think last night he was unleashed, he was on fire, and whatever it was that he said this morning pales in comparison with what he was saying last night. So he was at his peak. And if you're watching this, I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear that, but if you're watching this on live stream, you missed out, man. You gotta come to MoneroTopia next year.
Hey guys, I'm Bleish, Bonandin. Some of you know me as Katerina. A lot of Mexicans can't say the TH, and neither can my Italian family. They say Catherine, so they all call me Katerina. So you may hear Kat, Katerina, Kat, Catherine, last name Bleish. I am blown away by listening to John speak because I love the words he says. He's my ex-husband. We've got 2 children together. And we started a family based on all the things he talked about. All of them. They're beautiful words. They're fantastic words. I love everything you said, John, and I agree with everything you said. What I don't understand is why the coercive use of the state has been executed in the dynamic between the 2 of us, forcing our children who were free, who were sovereign, who were so precious and dear and had the most amazing, fantastic liberty life that many of you saw formed online, on the internet, over years of our joint activism, are now in public school. And if I don't deliver them to that school, I go to jail because it was your choice. So how is it that a community that talks the talk can have people stand up in front of you talking and talking and talking without walking the walk? I don't understand it. The title of my presentation today, when it comes up, is Freedom Sells, S-E-L-L-S, because I believe that liberty has been put on the market for sale. I believe that true fundamental liberty is an action, it is a behavior, it is embodied. It is not something we sell. It is not something we only talk about. It is something we do. And if we want freedom in our lifetime, it is really, really, really important that we learn how to hold our own community accountable. Because we have worked so hard to hold the powers that be accountable. John talked about a lot of our activism. We were rallying against the state. We were testifying. We were marching on the streets. We were rallying for the Republic, Ron Paul's Rally for the Republic, if you remember that. And what happened? We created this amazing movement. But human nature has the tendency to centralize, and our community also has that tendency. You see it through the centralized exchanges in the crypto community where people lose millions of dollars. They lose access to their crypto. I keep hearing the word self-custody this weekend, and I actually hadn't heard that phrase before. If I had, it didn't sync with me as it has this weekend. Self-custody, when it comes to cryptocurrency, it's fantastic. I love those words, and I think it applies to more than just cryptocurrency. It applies to every aspect of our lives. We must have self-custody over the food that we eat, over all of the institutions, big and small, that we participate in. I'm not here to attack John. I'm not attacking you. Speaking the truth is not an attack. I can go to jail if I don't deliver my children to the public school he enrolled them in. Last week, a child threatened to bring a gun and shoot my daughter. And that man was upset with me for wanting the boy removed from the classroom after the sheriff determined it was a false threat. Okay, this is real. Corruption exists in our own communities, and accountability is really important. What you see on this cover to my presentation, Freedom Sells, you see an image from the Ron Paul Revolution, the grassroots. Ernie Hancock, he coined that logo, the Levolution, with it backward. This was grassroots. We were hanging banners on overpasses. We were handing out flyers. I got spit on by people in liberal California, where I lived when I first got involved with the Ron Paul campaign. It was really hardcore. But we did it willingly, and we did it happily, and we had a lot of fun. In the middle, you see Monero. I think it's really important for the crypto community, as you'll see later in my presentation. It is a really easy place for conmen and predators to be attracted to for two reasons. One, freedom. When we believe in freedom, truly in our hearts, we don't want to be coercive with other people, and we're going to let you do what you want to do, and we're going to let you live the life that you want to live. I want to homeschool my children. I don't have that freedom anymore. It was taken from me coercively. And what you see right here is a picture. This is from the intentional community where I live, where mine and John's children spend half their time, where they were educated for 2.5 years. This community is 55 years old. This is not a startup. There is no one person in charge. It is run by a nonprofit with a board of directors, rotating leadership. And accountability takes place in this community. I have seen people kicked out. I have seen people asked to leave. Because when people become toxic, violent, aggressive, corrupt, they don't have a place at Greenbrier. And what I want to know is, why do they have a place in the Liberty community? Why? There are so many examples of people taking advantage of others. And why are they not held accountable? There's people at this event who told me they don't want to be involved with my situation because John does so much for Liberty. Well, what about our children? What about my daughter who is in public school now? Not today because it's Sunday, but tomorrow she will be. She does not. She asked David Rodriguez when he was speaking at your conference for help getting out of the school, and you know that.
Guys, this is not productive to what MoneroTopia
It is
all
productive.
About.
It is really
But
important
you got to
that we talk
keep it
about
focused on your
accountability.
topics and not,
This is the topic.
an argument between you and John Bush about
I don't need to
personal
talk to
matters.
John, and he can listen to me speak. The Ron Paul Revolution was a grassroots movement. It was decentralized. It was beautiful. And it was so much fun to be a part of. And then something fascinating happened. It started to centralize. The Rally for the Republic, Campaign for Liberty. There was a push for all of our individual communities to become part of one greater one. Resources were funneled to the top. Look, I don't think Ron Paul's a corrupt man. I think he is pure of heart, and I think he was walking the walk and doing the right thing. But our movement, our humanity, we have a tendency to centralize. We have a tendency to look up for leadership. It is easier to follow somebody than to pave your own way. It was easier to fall under the banner of Campaign for Liberty than to create your own organization. Our organization, the Liberty Restoration Project, received extreme pressure to convert to Campaign for Liberty. Don't use your own brand, don't do your own thing, don't walk your own walk, do it our way. And we didn't. And you know what? That organization was disbanded when it started to behave in corrupt ways. I moved down to Texas. Somebody took over who tried to use the Liberty Restoration Project for their own libertarian political party agenda. We are small L libertarians, the philosophy of liberty, not capital L libertarians, the political party. When they started trying to use the Liberty Restoration Project for political purposes, it was disbanded. We don't need to keep these organizations around forever. There's this author, Scott Crow. He wrote a book called Black Flags and Windmills, and he gave a talk at Brave New Books that I thought was fantastic. He said, activist organizations need only exist as long as their purpose has not been fulfilled. And once they've done their job, it's time to go do something else. That is when institutionalization and centralization starts to creep into activist communities. The Ron Paul Revolution was about trying to change things politically. These are the delegates at the Republican National Convention. We were elected from all over the United States, and we traveled to the Republican National Convention to try and get Ron Paul on the ballot. Come to find out, we were extras on a TV set. The whole thing was rigged. My heart was broken. I was devastated. And I went to the Porcupine Freedom Festival in New Hampshire, and I started hearing the words minarchy and anarchy. Minarchy, anarchy, what is this? What is this? Anarchy is a philosophy that involves letting people live their lives with no centralized rulers. It is non-coercion. Often anarchy is associated with violence, but that's not anarchy, that's violence. True philosophical anarchy involves no coercion, no ruling over other people. If you're breaking windows, if you're swinging fists, That's coercion, that's violence. That is being a ruler over another person. If you are wielding the state through the family court, that is coercion. That is statism. That is not freedom, that is not anarchy. 34.5 million raised by the Ron Paul 2008 campaign, 41 million raised by the Ron Paul 2012 campaign, 26.5 million raised by Campaign for Liberty, and Ron Paul's current speaker fee is $50,000. Freedom sells. I mean it when I say it. There is a lot of money in talking about freedom. I think the Ron Paul campaign did really good things. It lit a fire for a lot of people. And a lot of people carried on. And this moved into the police accountability movements. This moved into the alternative currency communities, like cryptocurrencies. A lot of us are OG Ron Paul people, and I'm super grateful for this. In this picture, this is me and Adam Kokesh. We are at Jekyll Island. Has anyone read The Creature from Jekyll Island? Okay, G. Edward Griffin was there with us. If you look closely, this is before like good camera phones, okay? This is in 2009. Can anyone tell what that flag is up on top of the Jekyll Island Hotel there? This is where our most recent centralized bank was created, and a group of us snuck up on top and hung the Gadsden flag. So that is a Gadsden flag flying on top of the Jekyll Island Club. And we were there talking about how to correct things that had gotten so out of whack. This is post Ron Paul 2008, this is 2009. And what we decided was we were gonna have a Continental Congress, and we elected delegates from all over the country to come together and create accountability. This was our attempt at accountability. And this is what I'm talking about today, is accountability. This is where I met John. And we were thinking that we would write this document, kind of like the Declaration of Independence, right? And this would be the document that would save our current country and our current culture. And there were a few of us that were younger. John and I, Schaefer Cox from Alaska, I've got a picture of him coming up. He ended up spending over 10 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. And he was later let out on appeal, but he already spent over a decade of his life in jail. And all the activism that he was involved with was put to a complete halt. And this is because an FBI agent had infiltrated his community. And I am telling you, if you know anything about the history of the FBI and other coercive institutions, they exist in our communities. Jeff was like, where's the CIA agent, when he gave his talk on Thursday. The reality is these people hide in plain sight. And to me, if you are causing disruption, okay, any type of disruption, whether it be social, emotional, financial, legal, it doesn't matter to me if you are actually a paid provocateur, if you are an informant for the FBI, or if you're just a jerk. The consequences are the same. It is disruptive, and these people should be held accountable. So I know for certain that I have been monitored because, as John said, our names have shown up listed in different documents. An article came out the day I moved to Greenbrier Intentional Community. My face was on the front cover of the Austin Chronicle because 10 years earlier, a police officer had put my name in a database illegally, unlawfully. Never found a lawyer to see if I had any, recourse for that. Have no idea. But the reality is we have been and will continue to be monitored. We obtained documents that listed the names of organizations that were being monitored. The pirate radio station that was playing in Brave New Books was listed. Brave New Books was listed. The guy who ran the pirate radio station was listed. We have been, we will be being watched. And this is why we have to be pure in action, not just in word, not just in thought. We have to be pure in action because it is where we screw up, we ruin it for the whole community. We ruin it for the whole community. We have to be walking the walk. We have to be leading by example. This is of critical importance. This trend towards centralization seems inevitable. Some people will always be more motivated than others to seize power and control, and they will be able to do so because the rest of us like convenience and simplicity. This is just the reality. So even those of us here in this room who want a decentralized society, who want a world that doesn't have coercion, we have a tendency toward this. We turn to these institutions to resolve conflict between one another, and we should not. It's not the right thing to do. And so my question is, if we're talking about building these parallel communities and these parallel societies, and we've got solutions for money and we've got solutions for food, what's the solution for conflict resolution? Because in my experience, when there are predatorial people, it ends up being the state who holds them accountable. Look at Mt. Gox. Look at all of these examples. Who holds them accountable? It's the state. Look at the women in the liberty community who've had to get restraining orders because they're not safe in their homes. It's not the libertarian men standing up for them. They say, I don't want to be involved, none of my business. What happens behind closed doors is not my business. I don't want to know. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. So who gets involved? The state. So what is the solution? I don't claim to have it, but it's definitely not sticking our heads in the sand and ignoring the problem because someone speaks about liberty. Community accountability is of utmost importance. If we expect the institutions that exist to be held accountable, to change, to function differently, and we're trying to opt out, but we can't behave differently because we need the state to hold ourselves accountable, how can we even talk about freedom and liberty in our lifetime? And what example are we setting for the children? To be up on stage talking about decentralizing our life, about building parallel communities when they know that mom and dad are fighting in court. It doesn't make sense. Accountability helps to prevent exploitation. Accountability helps to deter harmful behavior. I've seen it work. Sometimes it's just calling it out in public, which is what I'm doing today. And I want you to know that this is an act of bravery for me. I've never stood in front of John before and talked about this in a public setting. So thank you for bearing witness, because this has been a painful experience for me. I believed all the words he said, all of them, for years. And when he started talking about statism in public schools, I told the guardian ad litem and I told the lawyers he's bluffing. He doesn't believe in this. That's not true. I was in denial. And if we walk in denial, we end up in dangerous situations. Decentralized communities often lack hierarchical systems to enforce rules, making accountability systems critical for conflict resolution. We need systems of accountability. It is necessary, especially when both freedom and money are coupled together, as they are in the cryptocurrency community. You can lose a lot. You can lose a lot. And of course, liberty requires eternal diligence, vigilance. You have to function with awareness. You have to do your research. But this is also why we have to have these conversations. And we have to talk about our personal experiences, because if you are not sharing what you have been through, others can go through it too. And what I am finding as I start to share my story, people are coming to me sharing theirs. And in doing so, we are finding each other, and we are starting to talk about what are the solutions here for this piece that is missing and so desperately needed within our community. That's accountability. This is Schaefer Cox. Spent over a decade in jail for a crime he did not commit. He was let out on appeal. I met him at the Continental Congress of 2009. I wrote him letters the whole time he was in jail. He's a good man. He's out. He doesn't want to be involved in the Liberty Movement anymore. Liberty Movement couldn't help him. Liberty Movement got him in trouble, and all he did was talk. He talked and he talked and he talked, and when the news came out about these false accusations for crimes he did not commit, acts of violence, a man preaching about peace, the Liberty Movement essentially turned their backs on him because they believed the mainstream media over him. Well, eventually the courts caught up with the rhetoric, and the FBI provocateurs that were around him. If you have people in your life advocating for violence, they are likely a provocateur of some sort. Be warned. Stay away from those people and call it out immediately. When I hear people say something about violence, if I am in a room, in a public setting, in the audience, I call it out immediately because I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want an audio recording to be played in some courtroom someday where I am not speaking out against it, because that is not liberty and that is not freedom, and that should not be welcome in our communities. And Schaefer was surrounded by FBI provocateurs who were instigating violence. And you know what the judge said? His reasons for saying no weren't good enough, and he'll eventually do it. And that was why he ended up in jail for conspiracy. Okay? Decentralized communities often form around shared values such as autonomy, sovereignty, or sustainability. And accountability helps to ensure that members' actions align with those principles, preserving the community's integrity. How can we ask others to join our community when we lack integrity? When there's no consistency between the words and the actions, we need both. Freedom is not a commodity that should be for sale. It is a lifestyle that should be lived. And until we can live it in full integrity with our values, we shouldn't be out promoting it, in my opinion. The absence of accountability. In the absence of accountability, decentralized communities risk fragmentation or collapse. Transparent processes and shared responsibility create a stable foundation for long-term growth and adaptation. We need accountability. It is a requirement. Without it, absolute chaos ensues. And I'm going to talk about this later, but we all learned that if you have watched The Anarchist on HBO, that's Anarchapulco, 2019, 2018, no accountability. That is a community with no accountability running rampant. That's what a lack of accountability looks like, and it results in very, very bad things. And in that example, multiple people died. Many cults and alternative institutions start with the foundation of freedom or personal sovereignty and descended into coercive control, fraud, and exploitation, or even worse. The reality is, a lot of people get wrapped up in rhetoric, and they join movements or communities that end up causing them or their family or others harm. This is not new. This has gone on for a very long time. I'm going to give just a couple examples. The People's Temple, Jim Jones, their foundational principle, equity and racial harmony. Over time, it evolved into a highly controlled cult that culminated in the mass suicide of over 900 people. Words are powerful. You can get people to do a lot of things with your words. Osho, I do a lot of his meditations. He started a cult, founding principle, individual freedom and spiritual enlightenment. The group became notorious for criminal activities, including bioterrorism and fraud during their time in Oregon in the 1980s. There's a documentary about this on Netflix. I've been going down a cult and true crime rabbit hole on Max and HBO and Netflix. It's absolutely fascinating. And what you find they all have in common is that in the beginning, people are speaking words that sound so wonderful. And they're providing solutions that actually provide benefit in your life, and they get you hooked because feeling free, it's like a high, man. It feels really good, and once you get a little taste, you want more. And when there's someone dishing it to you with beautiful words and they're serving it up on a beautiful plate, you want more, and you'll pay for it. If you heard of the NXIVM cult, this one was fascinating. Watched multiple episode documentary on this one. And the methods that he was teaching, they're awesome. I like them. I see how they were improving people's lives. And a lot of these people, they're talking about, sovereignty, autonomy. And yet behind closed doors, they're engaged in coercive control. Has anyone here heard that term, coercive control? This is a newer term that I actually learned through the domestic violence community. Coercive control is when anybody is using fear, intimidation, threats, or actual violence to get you to do something that you would not otherwise do. This happens in romantic relationships. It can happen between siblings. It can happen between parent-child. It can happen in a school with a teacher. It can happen with politicians. We've kind of been raised in a culture of coercive control. And this is when the parent hits the child. This is coercive control. And so these examples that I'm giving, I actually had like 12 more, and I just took it down to 3 because there's so many. Just go down the rabbit hole. They all have positive beginnings. Many of these organizations begin with ideals that resonate with people seeking freedom, self-improvement, or spiritual growth. Power dynamics over time, charismatic leadership, and lack of accountability often lead to authoritarian structures. Control versus freedom. Despite their origins in freedom or sovereignty, these groups often impose rigid controls on members, contradicting their founding principles. Freedom and crypto communities are vulnerable to corruption. I said I was going to go over this. There's multiple reasons for this. 1, charismatic leadership. Visionary figures. Crypto and freedom communities often rally around charismatic individuals who articulate compelling visions of decentralization, liberty, or financial independence. And sometimes we become over-reliant. This admiration can lead to an over-reliance on these figures, allowing them to gain a disproportionate influence and control, even in decentralized systems. Words are powerful. Words are powerful. A lack of oversight, decentralized structures. Well, decentralization is a strength, and I really believe it is. It can also mean there's no clear accountability. Without centralized checks and balances, bad actors can exploit the system. So how then do we solve this problem? Trust without verification. Communities often rely on trust, particularly in early stages, which can open the door to fraud or manipulation if the members don't critically evaluate leaders or systems. Are they just talking the talk, or are they walking the walk? High stakes environment. I mentioned this earlier. Financial incentives. The potential for immense wealth in crypto projects creates opportunities for greed, scams, and corruptions. And ideological zeal. Freedom movements are often driven by strong emotions and values, which can be manipulated by charisma for personal gain or to consolidate power. Complexity and knowledge gaps. I know I'm affected by this. Technical barriers. Many members of the community lack deep technical knowledge about blockchain or the systems they're engaging with. This creates dependency on experts who may exploit their position. I really struggled to set up my first Bitcoin wallet. John mentioned he wasn't into crypto at the time. This was 2011. I was pregnant, headed to PorcFest. Bitcoin was worth $3. I was like, I'm setting up a wallet. I'm going to do it. I ended up bartering a whole slaughtered chicken and met somebody at Brave New Books to help me set up my first Bitcoin wallet because I couldn't figure it out, right? And so this is a big one for me. And it may be a thing for a lot of women, also some men. But for me, wrapping my brain around the complexity, it's really, really difficult. And of course, misinformation, complex systems, and jargon can obscure unethical practices, making it easier for bad actors to operate unnoticed. What was that exchange that went down in Canada? It has the weird Q name, Quadriga. I mean, this is just an example of that. They tried to trace where the money was that was supposed to be in the exchange, and he had run it through all of these, mixing services, and they never could find the money. And people didn't know what they were engaging with. They didn't know that they were putting their money essentially in someone else's pocket. And he was playing with that money. He was gambling with that money. He was betting on shorts. Groupthink and echo chambers. I have witnessed this myself. Us versus them mentality. Freedom communities often see themselves as opposed to mainstream systems, fostering strong in-group loyalty and resistance to external criticism, which means when someone says, hey, I have a problem, I need help resolving this conflict, I don't want to be involved, I don't want to be involved, I don't want to be involved, not my place, not my business, I want nothing to do with it, because nobody wants to question their articulate, charismatic leaders. Blind loyalty. Members may dismiss legitimate concerns about their leaders or systems to protect the community from perceived threats, enabling corruption or authoritarian behavior. I am telling you from personal experience, it is better to take ownership of the problems, take accountability, and change the behavior than to cover it up and to allow it to persist. I'll talk about this later, but I watched Jeff Berwick with Anarchapulco be held accountable by his community, and I saw his behavior change. I know that speaking about problems is how we solve them and build a stronger community. Ignoring them, hiding them, putting them under the rug, and allowing it to fester makes it worse. And that's when the state ends up getting involved in taking these charismatic leaders down, right? If we can hold our own accountable in the early stages and not allow things to escalate to this point, then we're leading by example. Then we can ask people to join the Liberty community in full faith that we can hold ourselves accountable and we don't need the state to do it. Lack of regulation, freedom from state oversight. While freedom from government control is a core principle, it also means there's little recourse for addressing corruption, fraud, or abuse. Community-driven governance can struggle to address wrongdoing, especially if influential figures dominate decision-making processes. At Greenbrier, decisions are made as a group. Opportunistic entrants. Bad actors, they're attracted to this, and they'll come into it. I'm not saying that anyone I've mentioned is a deliberate bad actor. I think a lot of people, as John mentioned, are hurt people. They don't always do it on purpose. Emotional investment, hope and idealism, mentioned that a little bit earlier. So my personal experience of lack of accountability in our communities, I've already mentioned some. Here's a big one, Frios. Anyone know Frios? Oh my gosh, this guy took so much money. I was down there in Miami when he's taking donor money. He was trying to start this I don't know, it was internet on a card, so you could surf the internet and trade cryptocurrencies on a SD card without it, being established into the computer system. And he misappropriated all of it. He bought helicopters and Bob Stanley, sushi, and in the end, there was no accountability. He died. There was no accountability. I had a stalker, Ron Paul 2008. Some of the community tried to help me. Some of them thought I shouldn't be speaking about it. And in the end, he got convicted of raping another woman, not me. Theft. I have a personal example of a fundraiser I was working with, made a personal wallet instead of sending it into the organizational wallet, still at large, has the crypto. Con artist sells freedom while actively legally oppressing his ex-wife and children. I've already mentioned that one. Abusive men in general. Employees and women report violence, anger, misappropriation, and community turns a blind eye. And there is a guy who ran for president in the Libertarian Party who just caused a miscarriage in his girlfriend through physical abuse. And this person had been outed over and over and over and over and over and over by women, and people still gave him money. I mentioned this earlier, The Anarchist on HBO. That is a community without accountability. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. Watch the series. It's on Max. When accountability works, here's where I've seen it work. The radical transformation of Jeff Berwick. He was called out for the way he was treating women. And in 2021, on the Anarchapulco stage, he stood on stage and he took accountability for it. And he apologized and he named names. And it was chilling. People were crying. And his behavior changed. And I've never heard a complaint of him doing something like that before. And you can see the transformation in his appearance. He looks different because he's healed himself. The radical transformation of Lily Miranda Forrester Webb. This is personal accountability right here. She's one of the stars of The Anarchist. And after going through that experience, she decided to take radical personal responsibility for her life. And again, you can see it in her appearance. You can see how she carries herself in the world. It's incredible. Agora Poco, violence, embezzlement, misappropriation. Offenders were banned from the community. Accountability worked. Anarchapulco has no drama now, you guys. It is awesome. What you see in The Anarchist is not what happens now. I like to say I put a dome of protection over Anarchapulco, and I don't allow anybody who is corrupt in any way, shape, or form. In fact, there's a guy that wasn't able to speak here at MoneroTopia a few years ago. I guess he got canceled, Chris Sky. We were talking to him about speaking at our conference, and when he didn't know that he was live on a Zoom with us, he was berating his assistant, yelling at her just completely in a horrible way, and we're watching it live, and I'm like, yeah, never mind. We're not interested, thanks. No, it's a no, it's a no. If you treat people poorly, I'm not giving you a platform. And I think that needs to be the standard in our community. So to summarize, here's some things that we can do as decentralized communities to create accountability. We need to create clear shared values and goals through mission and vision statements. My master's degree is in nonprofit management, and I specialized in creating strategic plans. This works. When you have a strong, clear mission and vision, you always have something to go back to. At Greenbrier, when things get out of alignment, we bring it back to the mission and the vision, the children. Is it serving the children? Is it serving the homeschool work that we do? Encourage consensus and decision-making. Greenbrier, all decisions are consensus. There's no one leader, no authoritarian, no one coming in and pushing their ideals. We make decisions as a group. Transparent practices, including a clear record of decision-making and votes. If there is one person or a small group of people making decisions and you don't know why they made those decisions or how they made those decisions, there's a lack of transparency, I advise you to not participate in that organization. Accessible information. Make financial reports, business practices, and meeting minutes available to all members of the community. Greenbrier is a 501c3. We have all of our reporting available to anybody who wants to see it. This works well. Use decentralized technology. Blockchain can track and document votes. This is where this transparency of Bitcoin can come in handy, right? If we're not trying to have a peer-to-peer transaction that we want private, we can vote on the blockchain and let it stand as a record that is uneditable. Foster distributed leadership, such as rotating roles. Don't have the same people in charge all the time, and don't have just one or two. Have a group, have a committee, and let it rotate through. Create accountability mechanisms like peer evaluation and self-enforcing contracts. I have found that conducting surveys in an organization where people rate and review their experience with other people, it has created radical differences in the way that people behave. I've seen it at Greenbrier. It's part of my strategic planning process that I do with any organization. Get feedback from the people you're working with. If they think you're a jerk, they're going to tell you in an anonymous survey, and it gives you the opportunity to change. And when you change, your community becomes more strong and more resilient, and you're actually able to be more successful. Create conflict resolution processes and do not allow conflict to fester unresolved. My challenge to the Freedom Cell community is this. What is the conflict resolution policy? I asked John to create a co-parenting Freedom Cell and was denied. The state is what we deferred to. So what is the solution? What is the solution for conflict resolution outside of the state? Build a reputation system. Don't do community with people who have a poor track record. Talk about your experiences. Share it with other people. And in doing so, you may see that people change their behavior. My genuine hope is that John voluntarily goes to the state and says, you know what, I screwed up. Kat and I are going to deal with this outside of the state. Let's resolve this peacefully. And I hope the community encourages him and helps us to find a solution that doesn't involve the state. I'll know he's changed when he goes to the state and he undoes what he's done. Manage resources collectively. Okay.
Yeah, I got to jump in here.
All right, I got two more. I'll do them real quick and then we'll be done.
All right.
Manage resources collectively, keeping centralized decision-making out of the hands of a few, and conduct regular audits. Address any issues quickly and directly. I recommend annual or every 6 months. Audit the money. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you hearing my story and bearing witness.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This felt like a wake-up call. If I was a bit sleepy before this presentation, now I feel like I just had a cold shower. Damn it, John, why did you have to send the kids to public school? Anyway, the next speaker is Lola Leeds, who's going to be here remotely.
Yeah. Guys, we have a conference we have to put on at some point. If John wants to get his side out to some degree, we have to let him do that. But we have to keep this conference moving.
I'd rather just talk to folks in private.
That whatever you, I'm just I just don't want you to feel. All right. All right.
Hi, my name is Lola Leitz. I'm an independent journalist. I have a publication called The Rage, where we cover financial surveillance. And today I would like to talk about the criminalization of financial privacy. To do that, we're going to take a look at the laws that apply, which are namely anti-money laundering laws. We're going to take a look at the prosecutions that are currently taking place under these laws, which are the Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet cases. We're going to take a look at the justifiability of these laws. So do these laws even make sense? And then we're going to take a look at where we might be going from here. Since we'll be talking a lot about legal stuff in this presentation, I do want to mention that I'm not a lawyer and none of this should be considered legal advice. And I want to start by putting things into perspective. So in 2013, as most of you will remember, Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA was spying on the majority of internet users, which translates to roughly 3 billion people. Privacy is often regarded as the ugly duckling of human rights. It's really the only human right to which most people would respond with a yes, but. For example, if we would speak about the right to freedom from slavery, most people would not say, well, that's debatable. And something really interesting happened after these revelations, and that's that there was outrage. People were angry, and we lived in a time where lawmakers, the media, even private citizens who really usually don't care at all about this stuff, all seemed to be able to agree that privacy is a human right. And there was very broad consensus around the world that subjecting people to arbitrary dragnet surveillance is not something that we can reconcile with our democratic values. Now we have 6 billion people connected to the banking system. That is 6 billion people subjected to arbitrary dragnet surveillance. Every transaction that you make is watched, recorded, and often forwarded to government agencies without needing to accuse you of any wrongdoing. This surveillance happens overtly, and yet there is very little pushback. So in this case, there's no anger and there's no outrage. And in fact, I think most people would argue that financial surveillance is necessary to keep a people safe, which is an argument that we're going to look at a little bit further down in this presentation. This now leaves us in a rather complicated situation, as you cannot have any meaningful privacy without having financial privacy. And the reason for that is very simple. A person, entity, or government that has access to your financial records, especially in real time, is not just able to deduct things like your location, but will also learn your political affiliations, your medical history, your sexual orientation. All these things that are protected to be free from state interference can be surveilled and ultimately interfered with by accessing your financial records. This quote that I'm showing here is one that I really love because it's so true. It's taken from a legal case in California in 1974, where a law enforcement officer attempted to access a suspect's banking records without a warrant, which the judge ultimately ruled as being unconstitutional precisely because the data that this officer attempted to access was so sensitive. And this may now sound like great news for financial privacy, but unfortunately things like the Fourth Amendment, which is meant to protect you from arbitrary search and seizures, doesn't really help us here because we've done a very smart thing, and that is turn that system around. So instead of governments needing to request information from banks, banks are required to share information with the government. So what we've done here is that we've switched the burden of policing from the state to private entities. In the US, this is governed by criminal code and something called the Bank Secrecy Act. And these laws require financial institutions to obtain money service business licenses, employ know your customer measures, keep records of transactions, and report activity directly to a government's financial intelligence unit. These reports include something called suspicious activity, meaning reports on when your behavior deviates from your normal spending patterns. So say you have an average income and tomorrow you deposit $500K in your bank account, this would likely be reported to a government's FIU. It also includes things like currency transaction reports, meaning any transaction exceeding $10,000 in a day. And this is something that's really not unique to the United States. Most countries in the world have financial intelligence units and have very similar laws in place for the implementation of these AML programs. Both Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash developers have now been criminally charged with conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money service business, violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, and violations of IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which governs sanctions. And in the next few slides, we're going to look at the arguments that the government is making in these cases. Both Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash are fully self-custodial services, meaning that they never conducted transactions or transfers on behalf of other people. Instead, what both protocols really did was to bring people seeking privacy together. So seen from a technical perspective, both Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash are really communication protocols. The government now has to jump through several hoops to get Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash classified as a money service business. And one of those hoops is being able to prove that both services moved funds on behalf of the public, as defined by US criminal code. And the interesting thing here is that this argumentation goes directly against FinCEN guidance, which was issued in 2019, which does not classify self-custodial services as money service businesses. The Department of Justice is now trying to do this by arguing, essentially attempting to define what the word transfer means. So, for example, in the case of Tornado Cash, it's stated that a USB cable transfers data without having control of its contents, and a frying pan transfers heat, where they're seriously citing a food blog as a source. And as entertaining as this all may sound, the judge ultimately ruled against Tornado Cash's motion to dismiss, finding that control over funds is not a necessary requirement to charge a violation of Section 1960. What's interesting, I think, about this argumentation is that the government really showed us the danger of it. So by its own logic, even a USB cable provider could be held liable for transferring information that the government doesn't like. The government also needs to prove that the developers engaged in a conspiracy to launder funds, which they're arguing on the assumption that mainly criminals want privacy. So in the Netherlands, which is where Alex Pertsev, a Tornado Cash developer, has been convicted, the court has found that it was foreseeable from the start that Ether would be deposited in Tornado Cash from crime because of the concealing effect of Tornado Cash. It also argued that the suspect was aware of the significant opportunity. So this is taken directly from the conviction of Alex Pertsev. And what's interesting to note here is that the Dutch government found that 84% of funds deposited in Tornado Cash is of lawful origin. And the US Treasury actually found that that was up to 93%. So this is really not a lot of illicit activity going on in these protocols. The US government is still making the same claim, and this claim actually leans on the prosecution of Ross Ulbricht, where it was found that you don't need to know of specific criminal activity. Building a system with sufficient privacy protections is enough to be convicted of conspiracy. And here, in Ross Ulbricht's case, the government described it as follows. It is as though the defendant allegedly posted a sign on a worldwide bulletin board that said, "I have created an anonymous, untraceable way to traffic narcotics, unlawfully access computers, and launder money. You can use the platform as much as you would like, provided you pay me a percentage of your profits." So this was the government's framing of Silk Road. And what this means is that anyone building privacy technology can be accused of engaging in conspiracy to commit crimes, according to the US government. And in this case, the judge presiding over the Tornado Cash case in the Southern District of New York actually seemed to see the risk of this argumentation, and she asked whether these charges were comparable to criminally charging the creators of WhatsApp because criminals used it. And I think that that's a very fair comparison to make. Tornado Cash specifically is an immutable smart contract, meaning that the developers at no point in time had the ability to stop the protocol or to stop certain transactions from taking place. We can see this, for example, by the service still operating. And the government is now arguing that Tornado Cash had control over the Tornado Cash user interface, and alleges that it should have implemented an AML program there, while completely disregarding the fact that the UI is really not necessary to access Tornado Cash. And what's interesting here is that this argumentation seems to really be taken directly from current FATF recommendations. FATF, or the Financial Action Task Force, is a global consortium that guides AML policy, but it has no powers to make these laws itself. And it states in its latest recommendations that building a user interface, so literally just the interface, not any of the protocol or server infrastructure, just the piece of software interfacing with it, may be enough to classify a software project as a VASP, or a virtual asset service provider, which is a money service business, and therefore require them to employ AML programs. Before criminally charging Tornado Cash developers, the Treasury also added Tornado Cash, the software, to its specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, effectively classifying Tornado Cash as a sanctioned entity, which is interesting because OFAC's SDN list is usually reserved for individuals, companies, and in some cases shipping vessels. In response, 6 individuals chose to file a lawsuit against the Department of the Treasury and OFAC, and here they argued that its actions violated their First Amendment rights. But unfortunately, the judge ruled that Tornado Cash, the software, would remain on OFAC's SDN list, as software could, in the judge's opinion, very well be designated a person. Software is typically protected as free speech under the First Amendment. This is a point that has been proven hundreds of times, from the distribution of PGP in books published by MIT, to printing RSA encryption on t-shirts to smuggle it across national borders. Code is written and its distribution can by definition not be stopped or controlled without censoring speech. And so in both the Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet cases, the government actually goes even further than just attempting to frame software as free speech as incriminating. In the case of the Southern District of New York, Tornado Cash, it suggested that promoting Tornado Cash as an anonymous service in and of itself appears to suggest some form of criminal intent. So here they're citing that the developers are advising people to use a VPN or to use Tor and to delete data from web servers. And in the Samurai Wallet case, the same district is citing a post made by Samurai Wallet on formerly Twitter, which states that the developer was not afraid of Europol. And again, they're trying to use this as some form of evidence for criminal intent. So to recap the arguments that we've just heard, software is not necessarily considered speech, which opens the door to holding anyone accountable for developing and distributing code. The government does not consider it necessary to have control over funds to need a money service business license and therefore be obliged to employ an AML program. So this has implications for anyone building any cryptocurrency service, from hardware wallets to miners to nodes to self-custodial wallets. The government does not consider it necessary to have specific knowledge of crimes, meaning that any software developer can be held liable for the actions of their users. And last but not least, privacy advocacy and government criticism can and will be construed to suggest criminal intent. One thing that I do want to point out is that this discussion around these cases is often framed as a fight against self-custody. But I think if we look at the argumentation that is being made here, it should be fairly clear that these cases are really about regaining the ability to stifle dissent. Okay, so we've got all these laws and we've got all these people going to prison for them. So we should probably ask, do these laws work and how efficient are they? According to a FinCEN oversight hearing that took place in 2023, FinCEN, which is the US Financial Intelligence Unit, currently holds 350 million records, mostly on innocent Americans. So if you would translate that to every person in the US, that would be more than one record per person. The reason that there's so much data is that these financial crime laws are really applied by banks under a concept which they're referring to as CYA, or cover your ass. So CYA is a term that originated in the military to describe actions that shield you from liability. And it's exactly how these AML laws are being applied by banks. So banks don't want to go to jail for being accused of being complicit in financial crime. And so they drastically over-report activity to the government. This now leaves us with a hugely bureaucratic, complex system that is also incredibly expensive to maintain. So compliance costs for banks have gone up around 70% across the board in the past year. And Thomson Reuters estimates that the money spent on compliance globally totals more than $1.2 trillion. Okay, so we're spending all this money on AML, but does AML actually help prevent or recover crime? So recently, the US Treasury boasted that it had recovered $4 billion worth of fraud in 2024 with the help of AI, which is a whole nother rabbit hole we can get into another time. So this is 6 times as many assets than it was able to recover in 2023. But fraud-related crimes make up over $650 billion across the Americas. So the US recovered 0.6%. Let's be generous and assume that the US, being the country with the largest GDP, makes up for half of the fraud committed on the continent. That is still only 1.2%. In the EU, we're seeing very similar numbers. The EU recently passed its newest AML package. once again increasing the surveillance of that EU citizens are subjected to. And according to the AML package's proposal, around 99% of criminal proceeds continue to escape confiscation. So again, we have a confiscation rate of around 1%. Illicit finance is estimated to make up around $3 trillion globally. The confiscated assets that we can attribute to these AML policy only lies at 600 million, which means that there's a success rate of 0.02%, which means that we're spending 507 times as much money on AML programs than we're actually able to recover through these laws. So even if we played devil's advocate here and said that we could agree that a law that prevents 100% of crime is proportionate in robbing every person on the planet of their privacy, we should also be able to agree that laws that stop less than 1% of crime are not. So we know that these laws don't work and that they're essentially a total waste of money, but we're still applying them. And this push is mainly coming from something that some people refer to as the blob, which is a mix of the military-industrial complex, the intelligence community, NGOs, and private companies that issue reports on why these AML laws are necessary. And I think that it should be fairly obvious that the intelligence community and intelligence contractors have an interest in collecting intelligence. And so these reports are increasingly targeted at financial privacy technologies. So in the US, we have the Independent Financial Technology Working Group, which is a public-private partnership established under the Treasury between the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS, the DEA, the FBI, FinCEN, the CIA, who are then joined by private blockchain surveillance firms to report on illicit activity in the cryptocurrency space. And I believe they will be putting out their first report in 2025. In the EU, we have the Innovation Hub for Internal Security that's put out a report stating that cryptocurrencies are widely used for laundering criminal proceeds, directly referencing mixers, zero-knowledge proofs, and layer 2s like the Lightning Network, but there's really no data cited to back these opinions up. On a global scale, there's the World Economic Forum's Partnership Against Cybercrime, or WEFPAC, that includes PayPal, MasterCard, Europol, the FBI, the DOJ, the World Bank, and Bank of America, as well as a company calling itself SpyCloud, that's recently stated that the tough regulatory approach by US law enforcement is a positive for the industry, and obviously they're also recommending that we need things like digital identities to prevent financial crime. Then there's FATF, which we've talked about earlier. FATF just put out a new report finding that virtual assets are increasingly used by terrorist groups, which we know is not true, as we've seen FinCEN Director Brian Nelson state in a hearing in Congress that cryptocurrencies are really not a popular financing mechanism for organizations like Hamas or the Palestinian Jihad. Then there's NGOs like the Soufan Center, which is really a security think tank run by a former FBI agent. And here they're really echoing this FAF report. So they've put out an intelligence brief claiming that cryptocurrencies are increasingly used by terrorist groups while citing data that was just factually completely incorrect. We actually wrote a debunking of this brief and reached out to Soufan Center for a comment on why they'd quote numbers that have been corrected by Congress. Unfortunately, they didn't want to talk to us. And last but not least, there's national risk assessments from Sweden to the UK that portray financial privacy as the risk to national security, again, without citing any concrete data, actually citing themselves as a source. So here in the UK, we've just filed a Freedom of Information request to understand how they would come up with such claims. Based on such reports, and particularly national risk assessments, the FATF has classified technological features that increase anonymity, such as peer-to-peer exchange websites, mixing or tumbling services, and anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrencies, as red flag indicators for money laundering and terrorist financing. So if you've ever had your bank account canceled without cause, this is likely the reason. A lot of the work that we do at The Rage is actually looking at these reports and trying to figure out what data has been used here and how these assessments have been made. So if you want to support our work, I'll leave a donation QR at the end of this presentation. Okay, so what are these laws good at? The British defense think tank RUSI actually put out a report on this, namely on how AML is being weaponized against civil society. So RUSI found that the FAF standards and AML policies have been weaponized by authorities worldwide as part of a holistic campaign to crack down on targets who threaten their interests. Most often, civil society actors such as watchdog organizations, journalists, opposition figures, and other critics who threaten regime interests or stability. And they have also found that there is a perversion of tools and powers stemming from anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing measures within the global anti-financial crime regime. So we're saying that we need these laws to protect democracy, while really they're just a tool to crack down on dissent and promote censorship. Now, we need to remember that the anti-privacy movement is a multi-billion-dollar campaign, and that privacy getting a bad rep is really not an accident. And one problem that we're facing in particular is that the data that we have on the usage of financial privacy systems has often arguably not been presented entirely without bias. So the above chart is taken from a blog entry by the blockchain surveillance firm Chainalysis, titled "Crypto Mixer Usage Reaches All-Time Highs in 2022, with nation-state actors and cybercriminals contributing significant volume." And this graphic shows us the share of all sent funds going to mixers. And when we first just glance at it, right, like there's this huge thing in the left corner, and it really seems to suggest like, wow, this is very, very concerning. But then if we look at it again, we can tell that there's actually less than 10% of all sent funds going into mixers as classified as stemming from illicit addresses, which means that this would be a much more accurate representation of the data. So blockchain services are the main companies putting out statistics on illicit cryptocurrency use, and I would say that they have a fairly stark conflict of interest here. So in this case, Chainalysis, which is a CIA-funded government contractor for the FBI, the DHS, the DOJ, the DEA, etc., is reporting on privacy technologies that make their work outright impossible. And so in my opinion, that we're really letting the arsenate here work in the fire department. In this case, and what's particularly interesting about how this data is really measured is that we don't know. So for the most part, how this data is attributed and collected is really a mystery, or as they would call it, a trade secret. And so when looking at graphics like these, I think we really need to ask, how were these addresses attributed? So let's say attribution may have taken place by manually tagging addresses known to law enforcement. Does this analysis also take into account addresses that have engaged with known illicit addresses and addresses that have engaged with those addresses? And so how many hops are attributed here to classify an address as illicit? Again, very big trade secret, we don't know. In the case of US versus Sterlingoff, there was an interesting debate about this that was sparked. So Roman Sterlingoff is the alleged and now convicted operator of the early Bitcoin mixer BitcoinFog. And here, Chainalysis allegedly attributed BitcoinFog to Roman Sterlingoff to his Mt. Gox account, despite there being 19 addresses between Roman's attributed addresses and addresses attributed to BitcoinFog. So this is according to an expert report written by the blockchain surveillance firm CipherTrace. But this expert report was withdrawn. And it was drawn stating that the report itself may have relied on data that was unverifiable. And so now this should leave us to question if not even blockchain surveillance firms can agree on how to attribute data on the blockchain, then how can we rely on any of the analysis such firms put forward to put people in jail and make policy decisions? Unfortunately, we seem to be drifting more and more into a realm where this accuracy just does not matter. As stated by the judge in the Sterlinghoff case on admitting analysis conducted by Chainalysis as evidence, Chainalysis software, and I quote, does not need to, at least in this case, offer absolute precision. So if it were right only 90% of the time or only 80% of the time, it would still be valuable for offering it as evidence. So in the Sterlinghoff case, we now have a judge stating that it doesn't matter whether the evidence is accurate, just so you guys can get an idea of the state we're at with this debate. I hope that the previous slides answered the question of whether we need AML laws to protect us from crime. The answer is no, because they don't work. So where do we go from here? We now have an alleged crypto president. Are things going to get better? So Trump promised to build a strategic Bitcoin reserve, meaning build Bitcoin held by the US Treasury. And I personally believe that this is something that he will be doing, as there's just a lot of financial upside to that. And there's already a bill that's been introduced in Congress. It's called the Bitcoin Act. It was introduced by Senator Loomis in July last year, and it plans to assemble 1 million Bitcoin in the next 5 years. So if anyone remembers how the current treasury was built, so the current reserve, it was built on the confiscation of gold. And Senator Loomis did an interesting thing here, and that's it. She seems to have wanted to alleviate people of such worries right in the beginning by stating in the bill that nothing in this act shall be construed to confiscate the lawfully acquired Bitcoin holdings of any person. And it also states that this act affirms and protects the right of person to maintain full lawful control over their Bitcoin and other digital assets. So there's one key word here in both paragraphs, and that's lawful. I think we've just covered extensively in the past slides what the government considers lawful control in the financial space. But we don't want to speculate, so let's look at some of the things that Senator Loomis has previously proposed. There's an amendment to the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, as well as a bill called the Responsible Financial Innovation Act, which codify the control these AML programs are meant to have over digital assets. And in a press release, it stated specifically that the Treasury needs to combat anonymous crypto asset transactions. It also states that these proposals were inspired by Senator Elizabeth Warren. So just in case you were thinking that this is a red or blue issue here, it's really not. As for holding people on the internet accountable, Trump has campaigned to get rid of Section 230 for most of his last presidency. So Section 230 is a law that protects platform owners from being held liable for what users say and do on their platforms. Again, this is not a red or blue issue. Biden has proposed to reform Section 230 as well, under the guise of combating anti-Semitism. And so unfortunately for these reasons and a lot of other reasons that there's just not enough time to go into right now, I don't think that we can reasonably expect to have any more freedoms when it comes to financial privacy in these contexts in the next administration. What's important to remember is that censorship resistance does not equal censorship immunity. I don't know if anyone remembers, but a couple of years ago, people went swimming with their Samsung Galaxy phones because they were marketed as water resistant, but they were not waterproof. So that was a fairly expensive learning right there. In our case, that learning would be even more expensive. And so I think we need to be really aware that it is possible to apply these laws to the majority of self-custodial services just by the threat of going to prison. In conclusion, I don't think that these prosecutions will lead to the ruling out of self-custody, which is how this debate is often framed. However, I do believe that if these prosecutions are won, and possibly also if they aren't, we are going to see widespread AML requirements for anything and anyone developing or operating cryptocurrency software. I also think that we need to see these prosecutions in a broader societal context. We live in a time where dissatisfaction with the government is at an all-time high, and that this dying system is fighting really hard on all fronts to maintain its own existence. We're seeing this in all aspects of digital life right now, like with the proposed application of KYC to social media currently happening in Australia, to laws that backdoor end-to-end encryption proposed in the US, the EU, and the UK, such as chat control, the Kids Online Safety Act, and the Online Safety Bill, to global treaties criminalizing journalistic and information security practices like the UN Cybercrime Convention. As Emma Goldman said in her address to the jury, which deported her for campaigning against the First World War, "Nothing on earth would ever make me change my ideas except one thing, and that is if you will prove to me that our position is wrong, untenable, or lacking in historic fact. But never would I change my ideas because I am found guilty." And I think that we've spent the past 30 minutes or so extensively going over why what we are doing here is defying an unjust system that needs to be changed. Thank you.
That was a pretty good presentation by Lola, who decided to keep her mystique and not show up in person. She did this slideshow. Oh, she's gonna do Q&A? Oh, that's very cool. So if you have any questions, step up to the microphone. I guess she is listening to this. Or else send your messages via xmr.chat.
Yeah, I'm here. What's
I just
up?
want to say hello to Lola and wave hello. Thank you, Lola. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Lola, thanks for the fantastic presentation. Covered a lot of different angles on cases that I'm already familiar with, but I think you really summarized it well, that the core is re-allowing them to suppress dissent. But the question that I'm left with afterwards is a very broad one. Basically, what are the ways that the average person can actually continue to fight back? Like, what are the actionable steps that we can take, or at least start with, in pushing against what is clearly a corrupt system?
Thanks. I think that's a really good question. I can hear myself twice. Is that normal? So I think what you can do to push back against these things is exactly what's being done right here. And that is to keep educating other people to speak out against the things that are not okay, right? Not every one of us is a developer and can actually help build systems, but to just campaign against it, make initiatives, help educate your friends and other people around you. Because again, I think this issue is incredibly underrepresented. There's a lot of hype going around at the moment, especially around Bitcoin. And I think it's really important to just stay realistic and to continue this conversation about these things. So I think that's the thing that people should be doing.
What would your advice be to Monero users and developers specifically?
Honestly, I'm not a lawyer. I can't really give any advice to these things. I think the only advice that I would have is to try and stay on top of this stuff. Don't think that the law can't get to you. We've seen this happen now enough times, I think. And yeah, that's all I got, unfortunately.
Anybody else have questions? All right, I guess we'll wrap it up there. I could keep at. I'd be curious of your take on Havino. We just had a presentation on Havino earlier in the conference. I don't know if you're familiar with that software. Similar to Bisq, but Monero based. I'd be curious how you think Havino may be viewed in the current regulatory landscape.
Oh, cool. I've never heard of it. We'll definitely try it out. But if it's a peer-to-peer exchange like BISC, then again, there's really strong criminalization of these things happening right now. Like, for example, as we've seen with FATF, using peer-to-peer exchanges is actually seen as a red flag indicator for money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. So if you use these exchanges, you're probably going to lose your bank account and things like that. So again, this is why it's so important to really educate people and keep questioning the data on this stuff.
All right. Well, thank you for the very real wake-up call here. I mean, I think a lot of us have been paying attention to this, but you are at the forefront in keeping track of what the current regulatory landscape is. We greatly appreciate your work and greatly appreciate the fact that you chose MoneroTopia to do your first presentation. That means a lot. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I'm Liam. I work at Alpin Labs and have done snark research for a while. We're going to talk about this shielded client-side validated protocol today. So this is joint work with Robin Linus of ZeroSync and Jonas Nick, Blockstream Research. So, yep. Just get into it. So, I think we're probably mostly on the same page about this, but just some sort of motivation, right? Bitcoin decentralizes currency, but in doing so, you broadcast all the transactions, which has bad privacy properties. So lots of techniques emerged to recover privacy. Confidential transactions from Greg Maxwell and Blockstream, Zero Cash, Zero Coin, which became Zcash, CryptoNote, which sort of became Monero, yeah, so these protocols all had different sorts of trade-offs, right? Originally, confidential transactions were very large. Zcash originally had a trusted setup. Ring signatures have, poor privacy relative to proofs over the whole UTXO set. But these have mostly been resolved through the ongoing work of lots of people. Orchard and Zcash, and soon full chain membership proofs from Monero. And there's been lots of other privacy projects in the interim since the Bitcoin, Zexi, Aztec, etc. Okay, so privacy maybe sort of solved technically. So why care about this shielded CSV stuff? So in contrast to those other protocols that I mentioned, it is a client-side validated private transaction protocol. So I'll explain what this means a little bit more later. But at a high level, instead of putting proofs on chain, they're kept entirely off chain and verified only by clients. So this has a lot of interesting consequences. For example, it gives you more flexibility in what kind of proof systems you can use. They don't have to be small proofs. And also has interesting implications for user experience, etc. But a big part of the motivation for the paper originally was trying to sort of build a private meta protocol for Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has really reduced block space, and so we were able to get it down to 64 bytes per transaction, which is one signature per transaction, independent of the size of the transaction and the number of inputs to the transaction. And like I said, it's sort of designed to work as a Bitcoin meta protocol. What client-side validated here means is that instead of the state of the system being sort of verifiable from public data that has been broadcast, it's kept entirely client-side. So currently the protocol is unimplemented. We wrote a paper, and the paper is sort of generic over underlying primitives. And this is intentional because it's unclear, or to us, what the best way to actually instantiate this is. there's a lot of flexibility actually from ZK research that has been continuing. So one interesting consequence is that it's possible to build this out of post-quantum primitives like Starks. And I'm not sure how familiar people are with different types of ZK proof systems, but Starks are post-quantum. They don't rely on elliptic curves, but they have very large proofs. So if you wanted to build a private transaction protocol just using Starks and putting proofs on chain, it would probably not be feasible. So how do existing privacy protocols work, right? I mean, I mentioned a bunch of different ones, but there's kind of this general recipe that people go through to construct them. Bitcoin, we put transactions on chain. So you construct a transaction, the transaction identifies some coins, and then it puts signatures to indicate that you own the coins, and you spend the coins into some transaction. And that transaction is put on chain, and everybody verifies it. Privacy protocols, by contrast, don't put transactions on chain. They put zero-knowledge proofs of transactions on chain. So what information is kept zero-knowledge affects which aspects of the protocol are private. And so like a confidential transaction protocol would keep only the amounts private, say, whereas full chain membership proof would keep the whole transaction graph private. And in the case of like an anonymous transaction protocol, like Zero Cash or something, you need some sort of notion of nullifiers to prevent double spending of notes or coins or whatever we want to call them. So privacy protocols, expensive. Proofs are generally bigger than simple payment transactions. They're significantly more expensive to verify. This is less of a problem now, I mean, than it used to be. But there's ways to work around this a little bit. We can batch things and verify transactions in batches. And in theory, it's possible to recursively, non-interactively compose transactions to reduce the amount of data you have to keep around, as in Halo. But generally, these protocols, at least in the sort of way I've presented them so far, don't take advantage of the succinctness and work-saving properties of snarks. So people talk a lot about zero-knowledge proofs, but really the more technically correct term for what people are often talking about is snarks, succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. Zero-knowledge snarks are a subset of snarks, and they fundamentally allow you to prove a large, like arbitrarily large, complex, or arbitrarily complex statement with a small proof. So that's sort of what we're going to try and take advantage of in constructing the shielded CSV protocol. And it's worth mentioning that privacy protocols more or less universally have significant user experience issues, like with node discovery. So I mentioned snarks, right? There's this whole parallel path to the privacy stuff that has happened in roll-up world. And so a roll-up is a proof of a collection of transactions that are all valid and some summary of the transactions. People call them ZK roll-ups, but again, that's a little bit of an informal term. So like one example of what you could think of a roll-up as doing is, given a bunch of transactions, every transaction has a signature, say. Every input has a signature. And if you want to verify all the transactions, you have to keep around all the signatures. But you don't actually care about the signature, typically. You care about the transaction and the fact that it has been authorized. So what you can do with a roll-up is construct a snark, a proof, that all of the signatures are valid. And this proof is much smaller than the signatures themselves. And in fact, it's often, I mean, asymptotically at least, cheaper to verify the proof. So for data that we don't care about, we only care about sort of a validity proof, you can replace it with a snark. And this is the essence of what rollups do. They're sort of orthogonal to the privacy stuff, right? Like you could have private rollups, you could have rollups that aren't private, you could have things that aren't rollups that are private, etc. But I think it's worth mentioning because we're going to try and take advantage of the succinctness properties of snarks. And in terms of just context for rollups, they introduce complicated trade-offs in sort of design of the overall system. Because like I said, while some data you don't care about, or you only care about like a validity proof of it, other data you do actually care about. So, you know, lots of complexity here. And there's a sense in which the shielded CSV protocol is like a rollup, in the sense that we're kind of keeping proofs of things around. We're not putting all the stuff on chain. We're only putting a small amount of stuff on chain. And I think that these thoughts haven't fully crystallized for me, but there's a confluent aspect to this protocol with a bunch of other directions that people have been going in terms of the design of protocols like this. Okay, so client-side validation. The simple sort of way to get there, I think, is firstly, Bitcoin uses the blockchain to solve double spending, right? That's the essential thing that the blockchain was invented to do. And the double spending problem, as we all know, right? Alice tries to pay Bob, then tries to pay Charlie, and if Bob and Charlie never talk to each other, then, you know, they can't discover that this has happened. So we use a blockchain to establish consensus over a set of payments. Right. This recipe that Bitcoin introduced has been generalized. Like I mentioned, people replaced transactions with proofs of transactions. People replaced signatures with smart contracts, all kinds of stuff. But for our purposes, a transaction kind of has three pieces of data, three properties. Coin identifiers to identify the incoming money to the transaction. Some way of authenticating the inputs, that they have been sort of properly authorized by whoever owns them. So you can think of it like a signature. And then some kind of description of what the transaction does. So like it sends this money to this person, or it checks some additional predicates, etc. And the core observation of the client-side validated paradigm is that in order to stop double spending, the thing that the blockchain was introduced to do, you don't actually need three. Like, you don't need a description of the transaction. The only thing you need to know is where, what coins are going into a transaction, and that they have been sort of authorized by their owners. The third thing is nice to have because it lets you verify the whole history of all the transactions. But if all you care about is stopping double spending, you don't need to know what the transaction does. You don't even need to know that it's valid, right? Because the owner of the coin authorized it, and so it's sort of on them. And instead, right, we could keep the transaction entirely off-chain, right? You don't need it to stop double spending, so maybe there's a way to just avoid publishing it at all. That's what we're going to do. So depending on how large things are and what the transaction is doing, this allows us to move a lot of data off-chain immediately, right? All you need for 1 and 2 are signatures. So every coin, say, has a public key, and in order to know that it has been authorized by its owner, you need some kind of signature. Maybe there's even a way to just have one signature for the whole transaction, but all of the other information can be kept off-chain. So the public keys of who you're paying, etc. And this is a bit of what I was saying, what we do in the shielded CSV protocol is use accounts instead of UTXOs, so that every proof is sort of an account update proof, as opposed to a like spending of some coins proof. And this is how we get to one signature per transaction. But by moving all the transactions off-chain and keeping only the authorization information on-chain, there is now a problem. How do you know that the money I'm sending you is valid? In Bitcoin or in Monero, you can look at the chain itself and check either proofs or just like read the data directly off of the chain to verify that the money I'm sending you is real. If you don't have any of the transaction data, then you can't possibly know whether the money is real. And there's a certain way in which the value of cryptocurrency at all comes from this common knowledge property of its validity. Everybody agrees on the same rules, and they all, because everybody agrees on the rules and everybody knows that everybody agrees on the rules, it works. So like the reason that you accept money that I send you now is because you can send it to someone else in the future, and that you can't just create new money. If either of those things don't work, then the whole system breaks down. So we need some way to convince people that they will be able to send money to people in the future, and that it will be possible to check that the money is valid. Yeah. So how do we solve this? So if you want to try and define what it means for a transaction to be valid, you quickly sort of find that it has a kind of recursive definition. So a transaction consists of, in its simplest form, inputs, outputs, some kind of predicates that have to be satisfied for the transaction to be valid. So we want to check that there's no money created or destroyed by the transaction, that all the predicates are satisfied as they're defined, and that all of the inputs are valid. So what does it mean for an input to be valid? An input is valid if it is unspent. This is the sort of crucial double spending thing that we're trying to prevent by having a blockchain at all, and that it is the output of a valid transaction. And so what does it mean for a transaction to be valid? Then we go back to the first one and so on. So you sort of can work backwards from a given transaction and check that it's valid by checking all of its ancestor transactions are valid recursively. But like there's a problem, right? This would require knowing all of the history of the transaction in order to check that it's valid. And like some of the original client-side validated ideas just sort of sent along this transaction data with the transaction. You can probably kind of see how this would be a serious problem, because the way that transactions work is the money gets mixed over time, and if you go backwards in time, it sort of grows out like a tree until it covers basically all of the historical transactions. So for some like money that has come from something with a long history, you end up sort of needing to send the entire blockchain, prior to some date. And so if we needed to do that, then like what's the point, right? We're trying to avoid doing this. But it would work. So we want to do something else. It's also, worth pointing out, not private. In fact, it might, well, I guess it doesn't have worse privacy, but, So what we will do instead, and what was sort of known at the time that client-side validation was being originally conceived of, is to send recursive validity proofs of transaction history. So not send the history itself, but send a proof that you know a valid history. At the time, this wasn't sort of technically feasible, but now it is. So we're going to redefine the notion of validity of a transaction in terms of validity proofs, rather than checking the validity directly. So each coin and each transaction will have a proof, and we're going to check the proofs instead of checking validity directly. These proofs are constant size in the history of the object. So I can give you a single constant size proof that a coin is valid, and it is independent of how deep the history of the coin goes. There's a sort of subtle point here. If you read about snarks and stuff, people will talk about constant size proofs, so like Groth 16 or something. This is a different notion of constant sizedness. That is talking about constant size in the circuit that you're proving. This is constant size in the depth of the recursion. So this is more like IVC or PCD, like proof carrying data, which is the primitive we use to sort of define the system in the paper. We do not actually need proof systems that produce constant size proofs in the circuit. The circuit is the same circuit that we're checking every time, right? We're checking that the transaction is valid. And so there's a little, I could talk about it later if there's time and people are interested, but in any case, we can use many, many different types of proof systems, even proof systems that are not constant size, even proof systems that aren't necessarily succinct in order to construct this protocol. All we need is that this recursive depth constant sizedness. Yeah. So yeah, proof size independent of history. And I think it's worth reiterating that we can use post-quantum proof systems like Stark's. We can use folding schemes. We can use like Stark folding schemes, like the recent ARC work from Benedict Bunz. We can use lattice-based proof systems. You can use, I think all might be too strong, but essentially any proof system that you would have heard about could be used to construct this with different trade-offs. Okay, so what does the snarky version of transaction validity look like? A transaction is valid if it has a proof that the input and output amounts balance, all the predicates are satisfied, and all of the inputs have valid proofs. So you're not checking that the input is valid directly, because that would require recursing backwards in history. We're sort of stopping the recursion and just checking a proof. And what is that proof? It's a proof that the input is unspent. So this point is maybe a little bit more subtle than it seems, because it depends on the chain state, right? In order for it even to make sense whether an input is unspent, you need to know what the set of spent objects is. But setting that aside, we have a proof that the input is unspent and that it is the output of a transaction with a valid proof. Again, this proof is constant size, and it's sort of attesting to the previous thing. Yeah, so that's basically it. You just replace all of the recursive instances with proof verification. And since these proofs are constant size in their depth, this breaks the recursive sort of problem that we had before. And yeah, the constant sizedness follows from the constant sizedness inductively, right? If the proof itself is constant size, then the circuit checking all of this is constant size. And yeah, maybe one additional subtlety is that we're not necessarily checking the proofs. We're checking some weaker sort of composition thing, like in a folding scheme or an accumulation scheme. But that's probably not important for this. So I think I probably have time to talk more, but this slide is kind of like the catch-all for everything I haven't talked about. So that the real protocol, which is described in the paper, is more complicated. The idea, I think, is pretty simple of the client-side validation stuff, but it has a lot of messiness that can emerge in different cases. So one predecessor thing to this is Robin's ZK coins idea, which is very similar, but is sort of slightly different than how shielded CSV works in a number of respects. And one is this idea of proving a coin is unspent. So proving something has not happened is like heuristically much harder than proving something has happened. So what we do in shielded CSV is rather than proving that a coin is unspent, we prove that a coin is spent to a particular transaction. This is kind of equivalent in terms of functionality, but easier to do. Another complexity that emerges in designing such a protocol that was not maybe immediately obvious is how to handle fees. So in a normal sort of cryptocurrency, you have all the transactions on chain, you can check them, you can sort of check that the fee amount that's being paid to the miner is coming from real money. But in this system, how do you like communicate to the miner the information necessary for them to prove that their fee is valid? Because they need the transaction data, or they need some kind of version of the proof of it. And this also introduces a weird cyclic dependency between the like proofs of spentedness and the like payment to the miner, because you can't construct the proof that your inputs have been spent to a transaction if the like nullifier data that you're putting on chain, the signature, isn't on chain yet. So that's what you're paying the miner to do, but you don't want to pay them to do it until they've done it. So it's not impossible to work around, but it is complicated, and it requires like this multi-stage kind of proof thing. And the PCD abstraction, the proof carrying data formalization is a nice way to kind of handle this, because you have basically a graph and proofs of transition along the graph. And so you can add intermediate nodes to represent transactions in different states. I think I said earlier, we don't use UTXOs. We use accounts, which reduces the amount of on-chain data a lot. And so there's lots of other stuff people like to do with cryptocurrencies, even cryptocurrencies just for payments. So for example, atomic swaps and payment channels and all of these things. And they're not incompatible with the client-side validated model, but they have their own additional complexity. So one thing I don't think is on the slides, but is also a huge complicating factor for a Bitcoin meta protocol, is how to handle reorgs. So when you have a client-side validated account-based payment protocol, reorgs are very messy, because you can have a sort of something invalidating your state that to like an account that is no longer itself valid. So again, not impossible to work around, but yeah, very, very messy. If you were to use shielded CSV with a different kind of consensus mechanism that did have finality, this wouldn't be a problem. But you know, if you want to use it with something like proof of work, you have to deal with these things. Also, you have to send the proofs out of band. You don't put the proofs on chain. You have to send them directly to your counterparty. And yeah, so that's just fundamental to how the system works. Okay, so this is just a basic kind of sketch of how the transaction flow works. There's a lot of details missing, but Alice wants to pay Bob. So she first has all of her coin proofs, the proofs of the money people have sent her. She collects them. She gets Bob's account ID. It turns out you don't need to have public keys to identify accounts in the client-side validated system. And so she has a current account state. She constructs a new account state that has all of the new incoming coin proofs added to it and all of the coins she's sending to Bob removed from it. She publishes the signature of her old account public key. So she has a public key for like invalidating the old account state, right? She has to have some secret that she knows that she can publish a proof of knowledge of. And then that signs the next account state, a commitment to it. This binds the account state transition on chain. And this new account state sort of commits to all the incoming coins and the outgoing coins. She constructs a proof in some proof system that all the incoming coins were valid, that they were nullified to the new account state, and that the new account state transition is valid. So the recursive bit is this first point. The proving that they were sort of spent properly or unspent is the second point. And then the third point just sort of encompasses everything else. Yeah, and so that's all I have.
Yes, thank you for the talk. I guess my question is whether you've considered, I guess, what the implications would be for things like account recovery. So depending on like different protocols and asset types, and having a lot of data on chain, for example, means that account recovery can, depending on the protocol and the implementation, be pretty straightforward with like a very little amount of like seed data, for example. Maybe just kind of like in general for these kind of systems, or specific to yours, like how might that work? So I have something written down, but my computer, I don't know, boating accident or whatever we talk about.
Sure. So I mean, the clients in a client-side validated system are fundamentally stateful. The state is never broadcast to anyone. So if you lose your data and you don't have some other sort of backup mechanism, then it's not going to be recoverable.
You'd only need kind of like, I guess, a current account state though, right? Or I guess maybe like, so what would you need to back up, for example, in order to do some kind of meaningful recovery? What would that look like?
You need to be able to prove that your next account state transition is valid. The way you design the PCD graph does give you some flexibility in how you do this, right? You could imagine that you can have a node, so the way the PCD graph works is you have some states, you have some transitions, and you have proofs that you did the transitions correctly. So those transitions don't have to appear on chain. So for example, you could have a bunch of incoming coins. You could have some PCD state transition that aggregates all of them into one smaller state. And then if you define everything appropriately, all you need is that state, right? You don't need the previous proofs. But you do need something, so.
Okay, so yeah, so it'd basically be some meaningful current state would have to be stored, backed up, and made available.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, there's sort of like moving a step up, right? Like you could imagine you like put it on a data availability layer or something like that, but yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Kind of a tangent that you didn't really cover in the talk, but I know a big part of like actually implementing this, or the thinking behind it, is aggregating the proof commitments rather than have them done individually by each user. What are your thoughts on like the trust model in terms of being able to guarantee that like your individual commitment is actually in an aggregate commitment that winds up on chain, and like how that'll be coordinated long term if this actually gets built?
So the model here is that all the users produce their own proofs, and that so there's a related protocol in Ethereum world called IntMax that has a similar design, but one difference is whether or not the people who sort of put the data on chain are interacting with the users that are constructing the proofs. So in this version, the thing that appears on chain is a nullifier. We call it a nullifier. It's the commitment to the sort of account state transition. And there is no trust assumed between the people who put the data on chain and the people who construct the proofs and construct the nullifiers. This means that you have to keep the nullifiers around forever in order to construct certain kinds of proofs. I'm not sure if this is answering exactly what you're asking.
Well, I mean, like mostly what I'm concerned about is like the potential to exclude like an individual user's commitment or like censor transactions if you wind up depending on like a more central like batch coordinator to actually commit to them on chain.
Yeah, so this has basically the same model as like a Bitcoin, right? So there's some set of whatever you want to call them, validators that construct blocks, and if they all want to censor you, or some sufficiently large number of them want to censor you, then they could. With proof of work, you can make the kind of strongest argument that this is not feasible, but yeah, I think this is sort of fundamental to nullifier-based systems, in the sense that if you like broadcast a nullifier and people identify that it is you via metadata who published the nullifier, then you can't ever publish the nullifier again because they'll like know who you are, and this is sort of fundamental to the property that nullifiers have in the first place. I think the only way you could sort of work around this is with some kind of epoch-based system where like the nullifier refreshes every epoch, and instead of doing the simpler thing that I described, you'd also have to prove that your nullifier was not in the previous epoch. That way, you get like a new opportunity to do it every epoch, and you don't have to trust, or it would be like, you could still perform a transaction even if everybody who is validating the network wanted to censor you, so long as you're able to, at some point in the future, obfuscate your metadata enough. But that is a harder problem, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, first of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very technical and refreshing to have something like this. And I want to ask you, from a user experience point of view, how would these shielded client-side validation layers work? Like, what does the user have to do from the base layer of Bitcoin or Monero to access this?
Sure. So they're more interactive in the sense that you need to send and receive proofs directly with your counterparty. So that has a significant like UX component. And then I think that, I don't know. I don't know that it would be that different. There's just some data, you have to put it on chain, you have to send it to somebody who constructs blocks or puts data on chain. It is more stateful. So it's not quite as like stateful as something like Lightning, where you actually have to be online all the time or like very regularly. But you do have to keep the state around, and you cannot do kind of like this recovery from state on chain. I think those are the biggest UX differences.
So walking through the protocol a bit, so Alice sends to Bob. So imagine I'm Bob. I receive these coins. So what I do to actually so I look at the input side. I verify that the nullifiers in this transaction are on the blockchain in the chain, and I verify the validity proof of the transaction, as well, the recursive proof of the transaction so that proves to me that these outputs that I've received and the inputs were actually valid. So what data do I actually need to validate that recursive proof? Do I need like all the 64 bytes from every transaction from across the chain?
Yeah, great question. So the proof itself there's some terminology. Proofs have public inputs. So public inputs need to be known in order to verify the proof. And the public inputs to the proof consist of what we call like an accumulator or a commitment to all of the nullifiers. So the proof is defined with respect to a given state of the nullifier set. You don't need the whole set in order to verify the proof. You just need this commitment to the nullifier set. you can compute the commitment to the nullifier set from all the nullifiers on chain. You could also receive it from someone else. You could also, like, you could trust someone to compute it for you. Or, I mean, you could receive this and in a separate proof that they computed it correctly. So it's a little bit outside the scope of the transaction protocol itself. But no, you do not need to know all of the nullifiers.
Got it. And then I assume it's the same on the constructing the proof side?
That's a little more complicated, but yes, you only need to know so this fundamental problem reoccurs in a lot of these systems where you need to construct a Merkle proof. In order to construct a Merkle proof, you need to know the path in a Merkle tree. In order to know the path in a Merkle tree, you don't need to know everything in the Merkle tree, depending on how the Merkle tree is updated. So if a Merkle tree is updated in like a Merkle mountain range kind of way, where you're like appending onto it, paths tend to converge in the sense that like their lower bits don't change. If the leaves shift around a lot, then that's not the case. So for us, they do converge. And in order to construct the proof, all you need are the nullifiers in the block that your nullifiers appear in. You don't need all of the nullifiers. But you also need a path in the tree of like blocks. So this is kind of hierarchical tree construction, which isn't like specific to our protocol.
Got it. In my talk, I talked about the full chain membership proof tree and keeping the output of that same concept, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Here is our adoption method. We are collective sortie de banque in French. It's bank exit in English. So our goal is not to precisely, accurately make Monero adopt more. It's a more general approach how to unbank arise, so bank exit, okay? But we talk a lot about Monero, of course. I'm not paid by anyone. I'm not here to make people richer. I'm here to make people more free. That's my goal, that's my opinion. You can find us on Session, on Nostr, and on Twitter, YouTube, etc., and Telegram. But the name is Sortie de Banque because we are French collective. So just to be very quick, we didn't started with Monero. We started with a specification, a list of specifications, and that's why we ended up using Bitcoin plus Monero, because we think this is a multi-solution. It's not an only solution. So our solution is first, obviously, to leave the banks. But in the case of in these different scenarios, we can be like in World War III, for example. So no internet, no electricity. So maybe we could use silver coins. They are like very common. So in a big chaos, we could use silver coins. But our scenario is more like a normal one where there is totalitarian regime that is coming to us, but we still have internet and electricity. So we are here the most to talk about Bitcoin plus Monero, the combination of both. Okay. Our goal is to unite around common escape solutions, because people are like screaming everywhere, like, oh, wow, the regime, the French regime, and all the global elites are coming to us. But we need the same ground, the same tools, because otherwise we're like scattered everywhere. So there are some pillars, energy, food, money, and also communication and united local network. Because if we're not locally linked, we are very easily able to be scattered. So the tools are there. We can debate them. We can debate them further. Of course, they're Bitcoin plus Monero. Bitcoin more just for reserve of value. Okay, this is very important. But for all form of exchanges, we need untraceability, and so we need obviously Monero. Okay, for social networks, Nostr. It would be better to have not Nostr but not Moster, like a messenger with a small 1% or inflation. It would be like when I send a message, it would be deleted automatically if I set it up before. Because Nostr is not very used because the messages are getting there forever. And that's like slowing down the adoption. Because if I say something, I'm feared that in 10 years, it becomes very forbidden. So we need maybe a better social network. And for Messenger, pure Messenger session is our solution. It's better, more reliable than Simplex for us. We need very reliable, messengers, and eventually Element. But Element is more a federated alternative, and we need very decentralized alternative. And of course, energy. Don't forget this. Okay. And to resist in a practical manner, we need hard disk, USB key to make nodes, but also, and you have to buy it, and you will understand by yourself because I am not allowed to talk about it. Cordless angle grinder. It's not joke, guys. It's very important for what's coming. You will understand later, maybe. It's for your interior and exterior work. Okay, you will understand. I'm sure. But very important. No cable, a mobile one, and a printer. Because we have a surprise I can show you just after. And a printer, very important to leave the digital world and come back in physical world. So practically, in France, there is a lot of adoption of crypto. There are communities and stores everywhere. You know them. It's the same everywhere. And we try to make Monero adoption with local food producers. It's very important we start with food. And there is already a farm in France. There are some farms in the world, I think 3 or 4 of them. It's just a beginning. But we need to focus on food and basic needs. And so it's working, even in the countryside. And now we need to go further to have big adoption. When I talk about adoption, it's like not 2, 3, or 5 farms. We need 500 farms in 12 months in France, but I think it's the same in every country. If we can succeed to have 500 or 1,000 farms and food producers in one year, we can resist efficiently the totalitarian regime in Western world. Because if we have just 5 farms, they say, okay, Monero is forbidden. Okay, everyone panics and Monero is not used anymore, or just very dark side. If we have 500 farms and they forbid it, it would do a boomerang effect. It would get like even more used because people will focus on these farms, and yeah, logistics will be okay. So going further, we need to focus on UX. This is our opinion. We can debate it. Our opinion is if we want large adoption, we need to make it very simple from A to Z, and every pain point, we need to address it. So the example is Amazon cart. You have just one click and something goes back to you, the product or service. We need to focus on this. So here is the UX octopus. You call it like you want. It's like the Monero pump priming. The idea is to suck up some fiat, make it useful to have some Monero, to buy some quality goods and services. Because Monero alone is not that useful, for general public, the sleeping ships, But if they can buy quality goods and service, it gets some use, And once there is use, they spend online or locally for these goods in farms, honey, ham, etc., meat. And then the merchant has gains, XMR gains, and then they store it, but they also spend in XMR. And then we create an alternative economy, and fiat is stocked up, and it never gets back in the old banker system. This is the idea. And we have to make it very, very seamless experience. And for this, I announce you the creation of MoneroMap.org. You can already go to it. It's the first version. It's not very designed, but you can go on moneromap.org/map.html. It's the first version. You can make your enterprise appear on this map just by making adding a flag on OpenStreetMap. It's very simple. So this way, this map or this server, if it gets forbidden, it's no problem because data is on OpenStreetMap. So all you have to do, you go to OpenStreetMap, create an account, and when there is a merchant, for example, a farm, you add the currency dash, I don't know, XMR, yes, that's it. And in like 30 minutes, it will appear on the map, okay, on the V2 map. Now it's manual. So just add this currency XMR, yes. Eventually, maybe you can also add the survey date. And now we can start having a world map of all merchants, but it's not a private map. It's very open sourced global map, okay? And you can, then it would be also open source, you can copy it. So the objective is to have like 100 to 1,000 Monero chats per city in 1 year, 10 to 30 merchants, and 3 to 10 nodes per city in 1 year. So it's quite ambitious objectives, but we have to pay for it if we need. We have to, all the means necessary to get this objective. Otherwise, I think we are done. Another experience we need, as we are scattered around the countries, France, Mexico, America, etc. The idea is to make online orders, and we have mail post delivery. So here is the example for France. The farmer produces some good. It can sell them and send them directly to the consumer with the épicerie libre. It's like the free grocers. So anyone can just put some products on it, and then we can order it directly in Monero. It's a bit different from XMR Bazaar. XMR Bazaar is very important for any object, but the free grocers, it focuses on food. So no drugs, no things, no dark things, just basic pastas, rice, coffee, etc. And then we can send them, and then we can have recurring orders. And this way we can start the pump, So every 2 weeks I can spend, for example, $20 or $30, and I can get delivered my pastas and coffee. And if the farmer don't want to send the coffee alone because he has no time, there is some redispatchers like Monezone, but for the farmers, not Amazon. You understand? And this way, the farmer just send like maybe 10 kilos of carrots, and the redispatchers just send 1 kilo or less carrots with the fees, shipping fees. So this is for the adoption. So Monero map plus free grocers. We went further, and I'm urging a bit. We went further because the farmers told us, but Monero, Bitcoin, it's just digital. We don't understand this. We can't feel them, okay? They want to feel the thing like they felt cash, which is disappearing. So we adapted the Monero crypto check. This is like a paper wallet. You already know them, but it's in a more, design and sympathetic way to hold them. Though there is a design for every country. I can show you later. There is for Mexico, for Armenia, and America for now, and France. And you have the 5 centimes of Monero, and you can just scan the QR, and you don't need any app. The idea is when you scan it, you can print them home as you want. You fill them on the website, which is called bankexit.org check. And then you go to a web portal, when you have the verification, the amount of the check, and where you can store it and spend it directly. So you don't even need an app anymore. You can directly spend it. So farmers, I just went with them today. They really like the way it's physical, and it reassures them. It's more like a marketing approach, more than a very usage every day. And if we can go further even, we created the donations, the CryptoBox donations. It's like a sympathetic design Monero address display. It can be integrated into websites, so it's dynamic. You can click on the address to copy it. You can open the link, etc. It's more sympathetic than just a QR code, brutal QR code, because and you can also use them on local markets, because the merchant just print them, and it doesn't need an app or phone anymore. It just print it and stick it on his desk. And also we can combine it with the Monero payment request protocol that I don't remember his name, but that created this project. And it's very interesting, because this way we can make recurring orders, and then it gets a real economy, and it's growing. And in the end, this would be the solution for merchants. They have Cake Wallet, for example, which can store Bitcoin for store value and Monero for everyday use. And bitrequest.io is a very great open source website that can receive payments. But if you have multiple employees, they can all have some bit request, and everything goes to Cake Wallet. You don't have to give them your wallet or your keys. And also you have instant validation. Is very interesting. There's like a ding, everything every time something enters. And then it directly spends Monezone, your crypto, Bitrefill, etc. on Monero map too. So no euro or dollar needed anymore. Also, the final and very important break to adoption is accountability. People every time the merchants are telling us, oh, but what about the accountability? So we need to make extracts of accountability with Cake Wallet or BitRequest, the one you prefer. And then we need an Excel template sheet where we copy paste these transactions and sales, and it automatically calculates possible local tax owed. Yeah, so they are reassured and they can move forward with Cake Wallet and Monero. Yeah, so freedom crosses, I told you. And finally, one-click full node would be very great to be a more resistant network. And eventually, that would be great. Internet access, maybe mesh, I don't know, large scale, which would not rely on classical like GAFAM structure. It would be great, but very difficult to do, I think. So this is for me. This is the UX octopus. I think we need to start this, and yeah, this is my my chance to make Monero and anti-CBDC succeed. Thank you very much. If you have questions, don't hesitate.
Maybe you didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear? I was just wondering, can you hear me? Oh, okay. With the, I like the idea of the Monero checks. That's physical checks, great. But how can you avoid double spending? Like, because you would have to make sure it's not at the point of sale. You would have to make sure that it hasn't already been spent. How could you do that without an app?
The website can check because he has his own. The website can check it. So when you give one check, I have here one here, for example. I have a list of checks. The merchant which receives this just scans it, and the website will make the work to verify that it's actual Monero inside. And the best practice is to suck up the check at the moment, just when he scans it. So he actually gets real Monero, and it's not double checks, as you say.
Just the person with the check, he doesn't have to have an app, but the merchant would have to have, like, a connection to the internet and everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Definitely. But if you have no internet, it's no problem. You make trust with the merchant, and it just keeps checked, and we make it later. It's a story of trust, local trust, just for local use, and local trust with his clients. If someone fakes him, it just will not sell to him anymore. So everyone is losing. Okay, but it's more a marketing approach, than a very widespreading idea.
Great, thanks.
We can add Canada, yeah. You can go, I can show you the generator. It's here, yeah. Yeah, you can go here. So here is for France. I can say for States, for example. So you have a very important symbolic for US. No politics, no flag or something. And you can change it if you want. Of course, Mexico. And then I generate the check. It's paper wallet, but not the seed directly. It's first it goes to the portal with the check, and then you can order on the map, on the free grocers, and eventually on XMR Bazaar, or just donate it. So full A to Z experience.
I have another question. Can you share something about your experience of what works and what does not work in order to get people on board with using Monero?
Mm-hmm. The best is not to talk about cryptocurrency and nor decentralize. It makes them pop up like all bad ideas put by the media, the propaganda. So I just say it's the new citizen currency, direct client to merchant with almost zero fees, and that the state cannot steal. And I don't talk about cryptocurrency first, no decentralized, because it's too complicated for them. It's in the end, it's like in Argentina, they say the QR code money. It's just the QR code money. And I told them you have no, you don't need, TP is like bank terminal, the physical terminal. It just, you print your QR code and you're done. And I think it's the best idea to adopt. And then they have some breaks, and they say, how about the accountancy? And that's why we need the template sheet, the Excel sheet, and a way to send them by mail, for example, and a tutorial. Very simple. And then they say, okay, it's legal, it's simple with my accountancy, and it's 2 minutes for a wallet, so why not? And then they get more clients. I think is the approach. Accountability is very important.
I was. Excuse me. So I was wondering about how many of your vendors or the merchants who accept Monero are worried about the volatility of the coin. So are they worried about the price and changing as they're doing their commerce? And then how many of them actually keep their coins, or do they convert it back to euros immediately?
Okay, good question. Right. About the volatility, I told them that Monero is not made to make money. You know, if they want to make money, I'm not a professional. They can go maybe on Bitcoin, etc. And I say that it's pretty stable for 3 years, and they are okay with this. I think it's volatility is a lower difficulty for them than accountability. And concerning the about the price and what you say, the volatility, and I don't remember.
Converting back to euros.
Yeah. It's a very frequent question, and I just told them you don't need euros or dollars anymore. Today we have enough solutions to spend the few XMR sales they will make. So Amazon, they can buy all Amazon products. It's fair enough. It's just sufficient. And also yourcrypto.com, if you they want a printer, hard disk, computer, it's okay. And in the end, I tell them to be put on free grosses, and then they will sell their products and buy products of others too. So I think they don't need to get back to euros. I say them 1, 2, 3 times, and it's okay.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Pierre. This was very useful to listen to, and I hope that next time you're also gonna come to MoneroTopia, because this is a lot of fun. Someone on Twitter actually mentioned that this feels like PorcFest 10 years ago, except that it happens in Central America as opposed to the US. Very nice. You have lots of merchants outside who accept Monero for all of their products, and I think I'm gonna go shopping after this. But don't go just yet, because we're going to have a presentation about how to use Monero Nodo. It's also remote. And what else should I say? Monero Nodo is this one-click device. You just plug and play, and you're going to have your own Monero node. You can accept payments to it, and it's the sovereign way to do it. Of course, you can build one yourself. You can use a laptop. But this is for people who are not technical. And I think Douglas is also selling a couple of them outside.